There is a story so vast, so quietly woven through decades of imagination, that even those who know it well can find themselves sinking slowly into its rhythms, its worlds, its long silences between battles. The Dragon Ball timeline stretches back before time itself had a name, before planets had formed from dust and starlight, before even the gods had learned the weight of their own power. It is a story that begins in the dark before the dark, and it carries you, gently, patiently, all the way to the edge of something that feels, in the stillness of night, like wonder. So settle in, let your shoulders drop, and allow the story to begin. Get comfortable, because this is going to be a long and peaceful journey through every age, every saga, and every quiet moment of Dragon Ball's full and extraordinary timeline. Long before the first wish was spoken into the stars, there existed only silence. In that silence lived something ancient and absolute, a being of incomprehensible scale, whose thoughts moved slower than centuries and whose presence gave shape to everything that followed. That being was Zeno, the Omni King, the ruler of all that existed and all that would ever exist. He did not arrive, he simply was, and in the way that certain things simply are, he began to create. In the beginning, Zeno brought forth 18 universes. He shaped them one by one, each one a vast and intricate space unto itself. And for each universe he created a mirror twin, a paired counterpart that shared its fundamental number but carried its own distinct qualities. These universes were not empty places. They were filled with races and planets, with evolving creatures and ancient civilizations, with the slow stirring of life reaching upward toward the stars. Zeno looked upon all of this with the simple, unassuming curiosity of something that has never had to worry about anything at all. Among the many beings that arose in those early ages, one group stood apart in their ambition and their craft. These were the creators of the Super Dragon Balls, objects of such impossible scale that they resembled planets more than they resembled spheres. No one alive today remembers every detail of their making. What is known is that the Super Dragon Balls held the power to grant any wish at all, without condition, without limitation, without the quiet asterisks that smaller magical objects tend to carry. Their dragon, Super Shenron, was not a creature of this world in any comfortable sense. He was something older, something that answered not to any single universe, but to all of them at once. Zeno, watching all of this unfold, grew curious about something specific, about power. He wanted to know which of his universes held the strongest races, the most capable warriors, and so he organized what history would eventually remember as the very first tournament of power. Fighters gathered from the universes Zeno had made, and they competed in ways that even the gods found difficult to fully understand. But when the tournament was over, Zeno was not pleased. Many of the universes had disappointed him. Their fighters had been weak, their civilizations thin, their potential unrealized, and so, with the same quiet ease with which he had made them, Zeno erased 6 of the 18 universes he had created, 6 entire realities with all their planets and peoples and histories were simply gone. 12 universes remained. This is the first great event in the Dragon Ball timeline. Not a battle, not a transformation, not a heroic moment of self-sacrifice, but an erasure, a quiet removal, the universe that would eventually produce Goku, that would hold planet Vegeta and Namek and the little blue planet called Earth, was one of the 12 that survived. But it survived by the thinnest of margins, and in the long, careful telling of this timeline, that fact sits near the very beginning like a held breath. The gods who then populated Universe 7 were not all of one kind. There were gods of destruction, charged with maintaining balance by eliminating what had grown excessive. There were angels, caretakers of the gods themselves, beings of perfect serenity who watched over their charges with something that resembled patience and something that resembled affection. There were the Kais, the gods of creation who guided the growth of life across the universe's many worlds. And above all of them, in a realm so elevated it barely touched the concerns of the worlds below, sat the Grand Supreme Kai, a presence of authority so complete that even the gods of destruction deferred to him. These figures did not know, in those earliest centuries, that a threat was already forming deep in the forgotten corners of their universe. That threat had a name. Two names, really. The first belonged to a wizard called Bibidi, whose understanding of magic had grown so precise, so deep, that he had crossed the boundary between what should be possible and what simply is. Using that magic, Bibidi created something, a creature so new and so ancient at the same time that no existing category could hold it. That creature, when it eventually opened its eyes to the universe, was known as Majin Buu. Majin Buu, in his original form, was not the round pink figure that many remember from the later chapters of Dragon Ball Z. The original Majin Buu was something far more terrifying, a gray angular being of enormous cruelty and even more enormous power. He was not evil in the way that careful, calculating villains are evil. He was evil the way a storm is, not because he chose it, but because destruction was simply what he was. He moved through Universe 7 like a force of nature with a face, absorbing and destroying in equal measure, leaving nothing recognizable behind him. His most consequential act in those distant ages was his encounter with the Kais. One by one, he absorbed the supreme Kais of Universe 7. He consumed Daikeo, the Grand Supreme Kai himself, and in doing so, something unexpected happened. The warmth and gentleness that had defined Daikyo began to seep through the absorption, softening the creature from within. Majin Buu, who had been nothing but destruction, began to carry inside him the faintest echo of kindness. It changed his shape. It changed his nature. He became the rounder, softer, almost childlike figure who would eventually reappear thousands of years later in Dragon Ball Z. But that softening came with a cost. In absorbing the Grand Supreme Kai, Buu weakened his own power significantly. The gray, angular form, the original form, had carried a level of energy that even gods of destruction would have found difficult to approach. The new form, pink and round and strangely gentle, was still immensely powerful by any mortal measure, but he was no longer the absolute terror he had once been. BBD, who had created him, used this moment of relative weakness to seal Buu away in a magical pod. He sent that pod hurtling toward a small, ordinary planet called Earth, where it would remain buried and dormant for thousands of years. BBD did not survive long after that. He was found and destroyed by the remaining Supreme Kai, who would later be known simply as Shin. But BBD had not worked alone. He had a son, a thin, nervous, obsessive creature named Babidi, who shared his father's talent for dark magic and his father's absolute devotion to one singular goal. Babidi spent his entire existence searching the universe for the pod that held Majin Buu. He would eventually find it. But that chapter of the story belongs to a much later age. For now, the pod simply drifts in the quiet dark beneath the earth, patient as only sealed things can be. What is worth pausing on, in the stillness of this moment, is the sheer length of time involved. Thousands of years separate the sealing of Buu from the events that will eventually unfold in Dragon Ball Z. The timeline of Dragon Ball is not measured in months or even decades. It is measured in centuries, in geological ages, in the slow drift of civilizations rising and dissolving and rising again somewhere new. To follow it properly is to practice a kind of patience, the same patience that good sleep requires, perhaps, a willingness to let things unfold in their own time. Far across the universe, on a planet of deep green skies and even deeper quiet, the Namekian people lived. Namek, as it would later be known to visitors from Earth, was a world shaped by a harmony between its people and their environment that had no precise equivalent anywhere else in Universe 7. The Namekians were not a warrior race by nature. They were thinkers, healers, creators. They had developed an understanding of natural energy so refined that they could channel it in ways that resembled magic to any outside observer. Among the Namekians, there existed an extraordinary tradition. Certain gifted individuals among their people had the ability to create Dragon Balls, spheres of condensed magical energy that, when gathered together, could summon a divine dragon capable of granting wishes. The Namekian Dragon Balls were not as powerful as the Super Dragon Balls that had been crafted in the ancient age of creation. They could not rewrite reality itself, but they could do things that no other force in the universe could reliably accomplish. They could restore life, move objects of impossible scale, grant wishes that defied ordinary physics. One Namekian in particular, a figure of great wisdom and growing concern, eventually made a decision that would change the shape of Dragon Ball's entire story. His name in the records of what followed was Katus. Facing serious environmental difficulties on his home planet, Katus sent his young son away toward Earth for safety. That son would eventually grow into the being known as Kami, a gentle, thoughtful Namekian who would become the guardian deity of planet Earth itself. Kami settled at a place in the sky above the Earth, a floating sanctuary that came to be called the Lookout. From that elevated place, he watched over the planet below with the particular patience of someone who has lived long enough to understand that protection is not always the same thing as intervention. He had a companion in this work, a small, wise, eternally patient being named Mr. Popo, who maintained the lookout and served as assistant to whoever held the role of Earth's guardian. Below the lookout, on a tall, solitary tower that pierced the clouds, lived Korin, a cat of remarkable age and calm disposition, who cultivated senzu beans and offered guidance to those who managed the extraordinary feat of climbing all the way up to meet him. Kami, drawing on the deep Namekian tradition he carried within him, created 7 Dragon Balls and distributed them across the Earth. These spheres, each marked with a different number of stars from 1 to 7, would lie dormant until someone gathered them all. When they were gathered, the summoning could begin, and the great dragon Shenron would rise, his scales dark as midnight, his eyes burning gold, ready to hear a single wish and grant it. The creation of the Earth's Dragon Balls was a quiet act. It was not announced. It did not disturb the world, but it set the foundation for everything that would follow. Because without the Dragon Balls, a young girl named Bulma would have had no reason to venture away from her home one summer morning with a radar she had built herself. And without Bulma, a boy named Goku might never have met anyone. And without Goku meeting anyone, the entire story would have slept forever in a forest clearing, dreaming of things no one would ever know. In a distant part of the galaxy, far from the gentle philosophies of Namek and the quiet hills of Earth, there lived a race whose history reads like a series of explosions, each one larger than the last. The Saiyans were warrior people, born with a power that grew each time they survived something that should have destroyed them. They recovered from injuries with increased strength. They sought stronger opponents the way other races sought food or shelter. Combat was not a practice for them. It was a need, as fundamental as breathing. Their original home was a planet called Subdal, a place of harsh gravity and harder living. The Saiyans thrived in that harshness, their bodies adapting, their power expanding. But internal conflicts eventually tore the planet apart. Those who survived found themselves scattered across space, searching for somewhere new to settle. They found it in a place called Planet Plant, a world of remarkable beauty, inhabited by a people called the Tuffles. The Tuffles were everything the Saiyans were not. They were small, physically unimposing, but possessed of an intelligence that had produced technology centuries beyond anything the Saiyans had ever imagined. Their cities were advanced, their medicine sophisticated, their understanding of science deep and carefully developed. For a time, the two races shared the planet. The Saiyans lived in the rural, wild spaces. The Tuffles inhabited their gleaming cities. There was tension, but there was also fragile coexistence. That coexistence did not last. The Saiyans eventually turned on the Tuffles with the full weight of everything they were. Their transformations, their strength, the terrible power of the great ape form that the full moon unlocked. The conflict was not brief. It stretched over years, a slow and grinding war that the Tuffles, for all their technology, could not ultimately win against an enemy that healed between battles and grew stronger with each wound. When it was over, the Tuffles were gone. The planet was renamed Planet Vegeta, in honor of the king who had led his people to victory. King Vegeta was not a gentle ruler. He was precise, proud, and fully committed to the expansion of Saiyan power. Under his leadership, Planet Vegeta came to the attention of a figure who would eventually cast a shadow over the entire first half of Dragon Ball Z's story. That figure was Frieza, a being of cold, elaborate power who commanded a galactic empire through fear and organization in equal measure. Frieza recognized in the Saiyans something useful, a workforce of naturally powerful soldiers who could be directed toward conquest, who could subjugate planets too strong for ordinary forces, who could be pointed at a target and trusted to eliminate it. Frieza enlisted the Saiyans as soldiers in his empire. They conquered worlds on his behalf, clearing planets for resale to the highest bidder. It was efficient, it was profitable, and it was, from Frieza's perspective, perfectly controlled. He monitored the Saiyans through scouters, devices that measured power levels with mechanical precision. As long as he could measure them, he could contain them. As long as he could contain them, they were useful. But as their power levels continued to climb, as battles made them stronger and stronger, generations followed stronger generations. A legend that had lived in Saiyan culture for centuries began to take on new weight. The legend of the Super Saiyan, a warrior of impossible power, hair blazing gold, aura crackling with a force that defied all measurement. The legend had always been treated as myth, as the kind of story races told themselves when they needed to believe in something larger than what they were. But Frieza had learned enough about the universe to know that myth sometimes had teeth. The possibility that one day a Saiyan might reach that transformation, might surpass everything Frieza had spent his life building, was not something he could dismiss. It settled into him like a splinter, small but impossible to forget. Among the Saiyans serving in Frieza's army were two who would become the parents of one of Dragon Ball's most important figures. Their names were Bardock and Ginyu. Bardock was a low-class warrior, not a member of Saiyan royalty, not someone with exceptional power by the standards of his race, but he was capable, resilient, and shaped by every battle he survived in the way all Saiyans were shaped, harder, stronger, more aware. Jin was his partner, gentler than most Saiyans and notable for that gentleness in a culture that rarely celebrated it. They had two sons. The elder was Raditz, a capable Saiyan warrior who would one day arrive on Earth with terrible news. The younger was given the Saiyan name Kakarot, a child born with a power level so unremarkable that, by Saiyan standards, he was considered low class. In another world, that would have been the end of his story. But the universe, it turns out, has its own opinions about what matters. There are moments in the Dragon Ball timeline that carry a particular weight, not because they are loud, but because they are quiet in exactly the right way. The moment Bardock held his newborn son for the first and only time is one of those moments. It did not happen in a grand setting. It was not surrounded by ceremony. Bardock was not in most ways a sentimental being, but there was something in the act of holding Kakarot, something in the particular smallness of a life just beginning that found its way through. Bardock had been through something unusual. During a mission on a distant planet, he had been attacked and injured by a creature whose power had an unexpected side effect. It left Bardock with visions, not memories, visions, fragments of the future coming to him in flashes he could neither control nor fully understand. He saw planet Vegeta burning. He saw Frieza's silhouette against the light of destruction. He saw his own end and the end of his people approaching with the slow certainty of a tide. He tried to warn the Saiyans. He gathered a group of soldiers, brought his message to whoever would hear it, argued with the fervor of a man who knows exactly what is coming and cannot make anyone else see it. They did not believe him. Why would they? The idea that Frieza, their employer, their emperor, the being who had given them purpose and direction, would destroy them was not a comfortable thought. Uncomfortable thoughts are easy to dismiss. Bardock was dismissed. Knowing what was coming, Bardock and Ginyu made the only choice that felt right. They took Kakarot and placed him in a small Saiyan space pod the kind used for low-class warrior missions and aimed it at a planet far enough away that Frieza's reach might not extend there. Earth, a small planet, insignificant by galactic standards, inhabited by creatures of modest power and gentle habits. The kind of place a powerful being would never think to look. The pod launched. Kakarot, too young to understand anything that was happening, traveled through space in the small and quiet way that beginning things often travel, without drama, without ceremony, just moving steadily towards something that would eventually matter enormously. Behind him, Bardock confronted Frieza directly and alone, a final, furious act of defiance that the universe watched and recorded even if no other Saiyan survived to remember it. Frieza destroyed planet Vegeta with a single gesture. The planet and almost all of its people were gone. The surviving Saiyans were those who had been away on missions, Vegeta, the young prince, and his companion Nappa, and Raditz, who was stationed elsewhere, and a handful of others who would play their own smaller parts in the story. But the Saiyan people, as a civilization, were over. What remained were fragments, scattered, powerful, and carrying within them the legacy of everything that had been erased. The pod carrying Kakarot landed on Earth in a quiet place, as pods carrying destinies tend to do. It was found by an old man who lived alone in the mountains, a gentle, strong, uncomplicated soul who called himself Son Gohan. He had no children. He had perhaps not expected to find one. But he was the kind of person who responded to unexpected things with openness rather than alarm, and so he took the small, strange-looking child home and began simply and thoroughly to love him. The child was not easy to love at first. Saiyan infants are naturally aggressive. It is built into them as firmly as their eventual power. Kakarot, in those first days, was difficult and wild and entirely uninterested in being gentle. But then something happened that changed everything. The child fell. He fell from a great height, struck his head, and something in that impact, something in the particular way the brain sometimes responds to injury, erased the Saiyan programming from his behavior. The aggression vanished. The cruelty that had been latent and waiting was simply gone. What remained was a child with the body of a Saiyan and the heart of a human boy. Son Gohan named him Goku, Son Goku, and he raised him with everything he had, with warmth, with patience, with the martial arts that he himself practiced, with the understanding that the world was large and worth exploring and full of things worth protecting. Goku grew up in that mountain wilderness in a way that was entirely outside the ordinary. He chased animals. He lifted boulders. He learned to fight not from anger but from joy, because the movement felt natural, because the challenge was interesting, because Grandpa Gohan laughed when he did something impressive. Grandpa Gohan also gave Goku one particular treasure, a small orange sphere with 4 stars inside it. Goku carried it with him everywhere, treating it with the simple reverence of a child who has been told something is special and has chosen to believe it absolutely. He did not know it was one of the 7 Dragon Balls. He did not know anything about Dragon Balls at all. It was simply the most precious thing he owned, given to him by the person he loved most. Then Grandpa Gohan was gone. The precise circumstances of his disappearance, connected, as it turned out, to the full moon and a transformation Goku could not control or remember, would not become fully clear for many years. Goku was left alone in the mountains, caring for himself with the competence of someone who has grown up entirely outdoors, missing the old man with a quiet grief that did not require an audience. That was where Bulma found him. Bulma, 16 years old, possessed of extraordinary intelligence and an energy that moved at a completely different frequency from Goku's forced stillness, was on a mission. She had built a device, a dragon radar, that could detect the location of the Dragon Balls, and she had set out to find them all. She wanted to use the wish, as 16-year-old people sometimes want things, for reasons that seem important at the time. She had already found 2 Dragon Balls. The radar was pointing toward a mountain wilderness, and there, surrounded by animals and boulders and the comfortable solitude of someone who has never needed anything from a city, was a boy with a tail and a 4-star Dragon Ball and absolutely no knowledge of the world Bulma had come from. They were the most mismatched pair the Dragon Ball series would ever produce. That mismatching turned out to be exactly what the story needed. The original Dragon Ball series occupies a particular place in the timeline, one that is easy to rush through in retrospect because everything that came after it is so large. But the original series has its own deep, careful history, and the years that Goku spent traveling and training and finding his place in the world are not a prologue. They are the foundation. Without them, nothing that followed would have the weight it carries. Goku and Bulma's first journey together brought them into contact with a world that Goku had never seen and Bulma had never thought to appreciate. They found Yamcha, a desert bandit whose bravado concealed a genuine warrior's heart. They encountered Oolong, a shapeshifter with smaller ambitions than his abilities might suggest. They found Master Roshi, the turtle hermit, one of the greatest martial artists in the world, who had been practicing his craft for so long that he had settled into a version of himself that was eccentric and focused in equal measure. Master Roshi would become one of the most important figures in Goku's early development. He agreed to take Goku on as a student, along with a boy named Krillin. Small, bald, intensely competitive in a way that made him immediately likable, who would become Goku's closest friend and one of the series' most enduring presences? Under Roshi's guidance, the two boys trained in a method so demanding that what seemed like impossible tasks at the start became merely exhausting tasks by the end. They ran for miles in the pre-dawn dark. They worked construction sites with their bodies. They learned to feel their own energy, to move it, to direct it. It was during this period that Goku first demonstrated the Kamehameha. The Kamehameha, one of the most recognizable techniques in all of anime, was Master Roshi's signature technique, one that had taken him 50 years to develop. Goku, watching it performed once, simply did it. Not perfectly, not with Roshi's power or precision, but recognizably in exactly the right shape. The look on Roshi's face in that moment is one of Dragon Ball's quiet understatements. A teacher confronting the truth that the student has already surpassed the speed of learning and is running on something else entirely. The first World Martial Arts tournament that Goku attended came early in this era, and it introduced a theme that would run through Dragon Ball's entire history. The idea that strength, properly understood, is not about defeating others, but about becoming something. Goku did not win that first tournament. He came very close in a final match against Jackie Chun, who was, in a disguise that fooled no one paying close attention, Master Roshi himself. The master had entered the tournament anonymously to push his students to reach for something beyond what comfortable training would produce. He won. Goku lost. And Goku, in losing, understood something about the road ahead. The Red Ribbon Army era followed, a chapter of the original series that introduced organized villainy on a larger scale than the story had yet attempted. The Red Ribbon Army was a paramilitary organization of considerable resources and considerable cruelty, dedicated to collecting the Dragon Balls for reasons rooted in the particular obsessions of its leader, General Red. Their pursuit of the Dragon Balls brought them into direct conflict with Goku, who dismantled their operations with the focused thoroughness of someone who takes things seriously when people are being hurt. Among the enemies and allies Goku encountered in this period, two deserve particular attention. The first was Mercenary Tao, an assassin of extraordinary power, casual about his work in the way that terrible skill sometimes makes people casual, who served the Red Ribbon Army and became one of Goku's most significant early challenges. The second was the fortune teller Baba, an ancient figure connected to the spirit world, who arranged a tournament of her own that brought unexpected emotional depth to the arc, including a fighter who turned out to be the spirit of Grandpa Gohan, given briefly back to the living world to see his grandson grown and capable and whole. That reunion, brief and quiet, and carried with the particular delicacy that Dragon Ball uses for moments of genuine emotion, is one of the original series' treasures. Grandpa Gohan was proud. That was the whole of it. That was enough. As the original Dragon Ball series moved through its later chapters, the story arrived at something darker and deeper than anything that had come before. Pilaf and the Red Ribbon Army had been colorful adversaries, even entertaining ones. But King Piccolo, the Demon King, was something categorically different. He was the first villain in the series who felt genuinely dangerous, not just to Goku but to the world itself. King Piccolo's origin was, in its own way, a story of balance gone wrong. Long before Dragon Ball's present day, the being who would become Kami had split himself, not by accident, but deliberately. To become the guardian deity of Earth, the Namekian who would become Kami needed to purge himself of evil. That purged evil did not disappear. It took form. It became a separate entity, a dark reflection with all of Kami's power and none of his intention toward peace. That entity was King Piccolo. King Piccolo had already attempted to conquer the Earth once, in a distant age that predated Goku entirely. He had been defeated then by a warrior named Mutaito, Master Roshi's own master, who had used a technique called the Evil Containment Wave to trap King Piccolo in an electric rice cooker. Mutaito had died in the effort. Master Roshi and his fellow student, the crane hermit Tsuru Sennin, had been witnesses to that sacrifice, and the memory had shaped them both in different directions. The rice cooker had been sealed and the seal had held for generations. When it was finally broken, accidentally in the confusion of a Pilaf scheme gone sideways, King Piccolo emerged as terrible as he had always been. He moved quickly. He killed Shenron, the Earth's dragon, ensuring that no wish could be used against him. He killed Krillin. He killed Master Roshi. He fought Goku with a violence that left Goku broken and certain, in the quiet that followed, that there was no path forward that did not require something completely new. What followed was one of the original series' most affecting sequences. Goku, too injured to move properly, crawled to Korin's tower. He begged for something, anything, that would give him what he needed. Korin sent him to a place above even the lookout, a realm called Kami's Lookout, where the Guardian of Earth lived. And there, for the first time, Goku learned the truth about where the Dragon Balls came from, and about the being who had created them. The training that followed and the eventual confrontation with King Piccolo is the moment the original Dragon Ball series becomes something different from what it began as. It is the moment the story decides to be serious. Goku's victory over King Piccolo, wrapping up the final battle with his body moving on something beyond what training had given him. Driving his fist through the Demon King's chest while the sun rose behind them is the kind of moment that a story reserves for the turn in the road. After King Piccolo, Dragon Ball knew where it was going. King Piccolo's final act was to spit out an egg, his final offspring, Piccolo Jr., a being who would carry his father's power and his father's name and, eventually and by a long road, something very different from his father's intentions. Piccolo would take time to arrive at what he would become. But he was in the world now. The timeline had added him to the register of those who would matter. The World Martial Arts Tournament that marked the end of the original Dragon Ball series was, in every technical sense, the same tournament Goku had entered before. Same arena, same format, same eccentric crowd of fighters gathered from across the world, but the stakes underneath it were entirely different. Piccolo Jr., grown to full power in the 3 years since his father's death, had entered the tournament with the explicit intention of killing Goku and eventually claiming the world his father had sought. He was not subtle about this. He did not pretend to be there for any other reason. The final match between Goku and Piccolo was the first truly great fight in Dragon Ball's history, not because of power levels or transformations, but because of what it contained emotionally. Goku was no longer the forest child who had met Bulma in the mountains. He had become something fuller, something more aware of his own place in the world and the cost of protecting it. Piccolo was not yet the ally he would become, but there was already something in him that was not purely his father's legacy, a quality that the story would take its time developing. Goku won, but Piccolo survived, and Goku, in an act of mercy that surprised everyone watching, and that would have long-term consequences that even Goku probably did not fully consider, gave Piccolo a senzu bean, a healing seed from Korin's garden, before leaving the arena. It was a small gesture. It was also a choice. It said quietly but clearly that Goku did not see Piccolo as something to be eliminated. He saw him as something that might, in time, become something else. This period, these years at the end of the original Dragon Ball era and the beginning of what would become Dragon Ball Z, is a time of relative peace. Goku had grown. He had found his place. He married Chi-Chi, who had been one of his companions in the original series and whose feelings for him had been consistent even when his awareness of them had been characteristically somewhere far behind. They built a life in the wilderness. Their son Gohan was born, named in one of Dragon Ball's most quietly meaningful gestures, for the grandfather who had made Goku who he was. Gohan was from his first appearance something different from his father. Where Goku had always been drawn toward strength, toward the challenge, toward the fight itself, Gohan was sensitive, thoughtful in a way that his power did not immediately suggest, deeply emotional, capable of a compassion that would, when the circumstances finally demanded it, produce something extraordinary. He was also, in those early years, entirely sheltered from the world of martial arts by a mother whose concerns for her son expressed themselves primarily as academic ambition. Chi-Chi wanted Gohan to be a scholar, not a warrior. The universe had different plans. The morning that Dragon Ball Z effectively begins is an ordinary morning. Goku is doing ordinary things, spending time with his family, visiting old friends, the kind of peaceful domestic scene that sets up its own disruption simply by being so calm. Then a space pod streaks across the sky and lands in a field, and a figure emerges wearing Saiyan armor that Goku has never seen, and carrying knowledge about Goku's origin that Goku has never had access to. The figure is Raditz, Goku's older brother. Raditz is not a warm reunion. He is contemptuous from the first word, contemptuous of the planet, contemptuous of the humans on it, and particularly contemptuous of his younger brother, who has, from Raditz's perspective, catastrophically wasted the potential he was born with. A Saiyan warrior of Kakarot's latent ability should have conquered Earth years ago. Instead, he has become its protector. This is, to Raditz, a kind of moral failure so complete that it barely qualifies as the same species. He brings with him the full context of what Goku is, the Saiyan heritage, the mission, the destruction of planet Vegeta. He also brings as leverage the knowledge that Gohan has been taken. If Goku wants his son back, he will need to come with Raditz and fulfill the mission he was sent to Earth to complete. What follows is a battle and a sacrifice and a rebirth of understanding. Piccolo, who has been tracking the energy signatures of this encounter from a distance, arrives not as an ally but as a fellow defender of the planet that serves as his own territory. There is something deeply characteristic about Piccolo's motivation here. He is not protecting Earth because he loves it. He is protecting it because it is his. The distinction matters, but it also barely matters because the outcome is the same. Goku and Piccolo fight Raditz together, and in the course of that fight it becomes clear that even the two of them together are barely enough. Raditz is a full-blooded Saiyan warrior, recently arrived from the front lines of Frieza's empire. He is simply beyond what Earth's fighters can easily handle. The resolution comes from Goku, from a sacrifice that involves letting his brother's arms trap him in place so that Piccolo's special beam cannon can pierce them both. Goku dies. Raditz dies. And before he goes, in a move that will have enormous consequences, Raditz transmits a message. Two more Saiyans, Nappa and Vegeta, far more powerful than Raditz, have heard the Scouter recording of Goku's power level. They are coming. They will arrive in approximately 1 year. 1 year. The Z fighters have 1 year to prepare for something that defeated Goku. This section of the Dragon Ball Z timeline contains something that the larger story sometimes moves past too quickly. The time that Goku spent dead. Not the fighting tournament on the other side version of dead, though that comes. Simply dead, in the way that characters who matter deeply to their stories are very rarely allowed to be for any length of time. On the other side, Goku travels the Snake Way, a road of almost incomprehensible length that winds through the afterlife realm to reach a tiny planet at its far end. On that planet lives the North Kai, one of the Kais who oversees the mortal world of universe. 7. The North Kai, who is both extraordinarily wise and endearingly bad at telling jokes, agrees to train Goku. Training on a planet with 10 times Earth's gravity in the afterlife, with a deadline imposed by the arrival of enemies who had already exceeded his strength. This is the period when Goku becomes the fighter he will be for the rest of Dragon Ball Z. On Earth, the remaining Z fighters train with equal urgency and unequal resources. Piccolo, who has no particular reason beyond self-interest to care about any of them, takes Gohan into the wilderness and begins training the child with a rigor that Chi-Chi would not have approved of, and that Gohan, who has the emotional intelligence to understand what is required even when his body objects, eventually comes to accept. The training is hard. It is also, in its own strange way, the beginning of something between Piccolo and Gohan that will become one of Dragon Ball Z's most important relationships. Not biological, not conventional, but real in all the ways that matter. Krillin trains, Yamcha trains, Tiaozu trains. Everyone who has been part of this story reaches towards something they cannot quite see, driven by the knowledge that the alternative is a world without a future. The year is not enough. Everyone knows the year is not enough, but it is what they have, and they use it completely. When the Saiyans arrive, Nappa, vast and violent, and Vegeta, compact and precise, and radiating a kind of cold authority that is different from the brute power Nappa represents, the gulf is immediately and painfully clear. The Z fighters who confront them in the barren landscape outside East City fight with everything they have been given. They fight with beauty, in some cases, Piccolo's protection of Gohan. In the moment of Nappa's most destructive attack is one of Dragon Ball Z's defining moments, not because of the power involved, but because of what it reveals about what Piccolo has quietly become. Piccolo dies protecting Gohan, and when Piccolo dies, Kami dies too, because they are the same being, the two halves of one Namekian soul. And when Kami dies, the Earth's Dragon Balls turn to stone, and every wish they might have granted becomes impossible until a new guardian is found, or a new set of balls is created. The threads of consequence in Dragon Ball Z are always tightly woven. A sacrifice in one place does not stay contained. Goku arrives, too late to save everyone, too late to undo what has been done, but not too late for what comes next. He had been wished back to life with Namekian Dragon Balls that had not yet been erased, a point of possibility that will matter. He fights Vegeta in a battle that takes everything the story has built and pushes it to its limit. Goku uses the Kaioken technique, a method of multiplying his power in surges, at the cost of the damage it does to his own body, and eventually the Spirit Bomb, gathering energy from the living world around him into a concentrated point of extraordinary force. Vegeta survives. This is important. Krillin has the means to finish him. Goku asks him not to, not because he underestimates the danger Vegeta represents, but because of something he recognized in the fight. Something in the way Vegeta pushed himself, something in the quality of Vegeta's anger, that felt to Goku less like pure evil and more like a person who has been given only one way to be and has never questioned it. Goku has always been able to see past the surface of an opponent to something underneath. He saw it in Piccolo. He is seeing it now in Vegeta. He asks Krillin to let him go. Vegeta retreats, wounded, furious, denied the one thing he has organized his entire existence around, being the most powerful being in his universe. He leaves Earth in his space pod. He does not become an ally that day. He becomes something else. He becomes unfinished. The journey to Namek begins from the logic of survival. The Earth's Dragon Balls are stone. 3 of the Z fighters are dead. Namek has its own Dragon Balls, more powerful, capable of multiple wishes, and still functional. The plan is simple in outline. Go to Namek, gather the balls, wish the fallen back to life. The execution is anything but simple. Namek, when they arrive, is already in crisis. Frieza is there. Frieza has been there, gathering the Dragon Balls with a systematic thoroughness that speaks to the difference between his operation and anything Earth has previously encountered. He has a small nervous subordinate named Zarbon, who is more dangerous than his appearance suggests, and a pride-driven fighter named Dodoria, who is not. He has a team of warriors known as the Ginyu Force, 5 fighters of theatrical personality and genuine power who treat their missions as performances and their combats as choreography, and who are, despite everything about them that invites amusement, genuinely formidable opponents. And at the center of all of this is Frieza himself, the most important villain in Dragon Ball Z's first and largest act. Frieza is not like anything the story has put forward before. He is cold in a way that is not theatrical, not performed. He is simply cold. He enjoys what he does. He does what he does with the particular ease of someone who has never been seriously challenged by anything and has therefore never had to develop any emotion in relation to his own actions. He transforms. He has multiple forms, each more powerful than the last, and the pattern of their revelation across the Namek arc is one of Dragon Ball Z's most carefully managed dramatic structures. Vegeta is on Namek too. He has arrived ahead of the Earth contingent, motivated by his own plan to gather the Dragon Balls and wish for immortality before Frieza can use them. Vegeta and the Z Fighters are not allies on Namek. They are 3 separate parties. Vegeta, the Earthlings, and Frieza, each pursuing the Dragon Balls for different reasons. Their paths crossing and crossing again in ways that create the Namek saga's particular density of incident. Gohan and Krillin find a Namekian child named Dende, who becomes their guide and connection to the Namekian villages that Frieza has been systematically destroying. Dende is the beginning of a relationship between Earth and Namek that will extend far beyond the saga. He will eventually become Earth's new guardian, the replacement for Kami, a being of healing power and quiet determination. But in this moment, he is a frightened child who has just lost his village, and the presence of these strangers from another planet is his only available shelter. Piccolo is wished back to life during this arc, part of the careful choreography of the Z Fighters, trying to use what little access to Dragon Ball wishes they can manage. And then, through a second wish, Piccolo is transported to Namek itself, arriving at exactly the moment when the pressure of the conflict has built to a breaking point. The arrival of Piccolo at full strength is one of those moments of relief that the story earns through the careful accumulation of desperation before it. Piccolo and Nail, a Namekian warrior of great personal power and greater personal dignity, fuse. It is a different kind of fusion from what will appear later in the series. It is not a technique, it is an absorption, a joining, in which Nail offers himself freely to give Piccolo the power he needs. The result is a Piccolo who carries Nail within him, and who is suddenly capable of challenging Frieza's earlier forms directly. But Frieza has more forms. He always has more forms. The final stages of the Namek arc build with a particular momentum of something that has been releasing pressure in controlled bursts for a long time and has finally reached the point where no further control is possible. Frieza reveals his true form, not his ultimate form that comes later, but his true form, the one he was born with, slender and pale and radiating a kind of effortless menace that his previous forms, despite their bulk, had not quite achieved. He is, in his true form, beautiful in the precise way that things that have never had to consider anyone else's existence are beautiful. He kills Dende to remove the healer. He kills Vegeta slowly and with intent, in a way that is designed to be the last thing Vegeta experiences, the confirmation of exactly where he stands in relation to Frieza's estimation of him. Vegeta speaks, in his final moments, with an honesty that he has never previously allowed himself. He tells Goku about what Frieza did to the Saiyans, about the childhood spent in service, about the dreams of a prince who was given only the forms his captor found useful. He weeps, the image of Vegeta weeping, proud, cold, relentlessly superior Vegeta is one of Dragon Ball Z's most extraordinary single moments. Goku promises him, quietly and simply, that he will fight Frieza. That is all Vegeta needed. He lets go. Goku and Frieza fight, and the fight is the longest sustained battle in the series up to that point. It is a fight that tests every technique Goku has developed, every increment of strength, every strategy the North Kai's training had given him. He uses the Spirit Bomb, gathering from every living thing on Namek the energy that Frieza has been denying to everything around him. It works. It does not work completely. Frieza, wounded but not finished, shifts into a final perfect form and kills Krillin. Krillin's death, a death without warning, a death that bypasses all the narrative preparation that usually surrounds important losses, produces something in Goku that all the previous battles, all the previous defeats, all the previous challenges had not. It produces rage, not the controlled, focused intensity that martial arts training channels. Something older, something that comes from the body rather than the mind, something golden. The transformation that follows is Dragon Ball Z's central moment. The ground cracks, the energy rises, the hair changes, the eyes change. Goku achieves the form that legends had spoken of for generations, the transformation that Frieza had destroyed planet Vegeta to prevent, the thing that should not have been possible and is now undeniably, permanently real, Super Saiyan. The legend had teeth. Frieza learned this directly. The battle that follows is not the longest battle in the series. It is something more than that. It is the confirmation of everything the story has been building toward. Frieza is defeated. The planet, which has been destabilized by Frieza's energy use and by Goku's Spirit Bomb, begins to destroy itself. Most of the surviving characters are transported to safety. Goku stays to fight until the last possible moment, and then, in the chaos of Namek's destruction, with Frieza apparently destroyed by his own energy, disappears. Presumed dead. He is not dead. He surfaces on a nearby planet called Yardrat, where he recovers from his injuries and, in the time he spends with the Yardratians, learns something that will prove enormously useful. A technique called instant transmission, which allows him to teleport instantaneously to any energy signature he can sense. It is not a combat technique, precisely, though it has combat applications. It is an extension of awareness, a way of reaching anywhere in an instant. Goku learns it with the same ease he has always learned things that should take decades. Time passes. The Z fighters return to Earth with the wishes granted, the dead restored, the planet healing. Frieza's father, King Cold, arrives with his surviving and rebuilt son, and they are met by a teenager from the future who dispatches both of them with a calm efficiency that suggests he has done this before. His name is Trunks, his hair is purple, his sword is real, and the news he brings is almost worse than the enemies he has just eliminated. Trunks is the son of Vegeta and Bulma, from a future timeline, a future that has already gone wrong in ways that will determine everything about who he is. In his timeline, 2 androids created by the late Dr. Gero of the Red Ribbon Army have been causing devastation for years. The Z fighters of his timeline are dead. Gohan is dead. Trunks has come back to deliver a warning, to change the outcome, and to give Goku a medication for a heart virus that will otherwise kill him before the androids even arrive. Goku listens to all of this with the particular quality of attention he gives to things that matter, complete, unhurried, fully present. He thanks Trunks. Trunks returns to his own time. The Z fighters begin to train for what is coming. Dr. Gero's androids, when they arrive, are not what anyone expected. The android saga introduces a layer of complication that the Frieza arc did not have. Not simply the power of the enemies, but the question of who they are, of how much of the human beings they once were remains inside what they have become. Android 18 is elegant and precise and carries a cool detachment that is somehow less chilling than Frieza's and more humanly troubling. Android 17 is careless with his power in the way of someone who has never had to care about consequences. Android 16 is enormous and gentle, possessed of a love for living things that sits entirely at odds with the purpose he was created for. And then there is Cell. Cell is not one of Dr. Gero's standard creations. He is the culmination, a bio-android grown from the cells of the most powerful fighters in Dragon Ball Z's history. Goku, Piccolo, Vegeta, Frieza, King Cold, Gohan, all of their genetic material had been gathered over decades by the tiny tracking machines Dr. Gero had seeded into the atmosphere. Cell exists to be the perfect warrior. He is the crystallization of every power the series has introduced, given form and intention, and a chilling elegance of speech. Cell travels through time to arrive in the period when the androids are active, because his perfect form requires absorbing androids 17 and 18. The androids arrive. Cell pursues them. The Z-Fighters pursue Cell. The interlocking urgency of these three different threads is what gives the Android and Cell saga its particular density. Vegeta reaches Super Saiyan during this period, alone and through the force of a pride that refuses to accept that Goku has something he does not. Trunks reaches Super Saiyan 2, the hyperbolic time chamber, a space within Kami's lookout where a year passes for every day in the outside world, becomes the training ground for the final preparations before Cell reaches his perfect form. Goku and Gohan train in the time chamber together. What happens in there, in that blank white space with its impossible gravity and its accelerated time, is a conversation as much as a training. Goku pushes Gohan to find what he is capable of. Gohan resists, not out of weakness, but out of the particular resistance of someone who does not want to become the kind of person who needs to be capable of what Gohan is capable of when he fully lets go. Goku understands this. He also understands what is coming. He pushes anyway. Cell, in his perfect form, announces a tournament. He calls it the Cell Games. He invites the world's strongest fighters to come and challenge him. And he does all of this with the performative quality of someone who has studied human culture carefully enough to know how to make an event out of a massacre. He wants an audience. He wants the experience of being tested. He wants, in whatever passes for a desire in his composite nature, to be the most powerful thing that has ever existed, and to have that fact properly witnessed. The Z-Fighters come. The world watches on television, uncertain and afraid and unable to look away. The fights proceed in the relentless way that Cell has designed them to proceed, each fighter giving everything and finding that everything is not quite enough. Goku fights Cell in a contest of Super Saiyan energy that is magnificent and insufficient in equal measure. And then, because Goku understands something that no one watching fully understands yet, he steps back and sends Gohan forward. Gohan is 11 years old. He has power that no one in the arena, including Gohan himself, has yet seen the full extent of. Goku sends him anyway. This is the most contested decision in Dragon Ball Z, contested within the story, where Piccolo and the others visibly do not understand or approve, and contested in the broader cultural conversation around the series, where Gohan's subsequent arc raises questions about promise and consequence that Dragon Ball's audience has never fully stopped discussing. Cell pushes Gohan. Cell creates Cell Juniors and sends them against the other Z-Fighters to provoke in Gohan the same kind of response that Krillin's death had provoked in Goku on Namek. It works. The rage that comes out of Gohan is not the golden heat of the standard Super Saiyan. It is something beyond that. A white edge to the energy, a stillness at the center of an explosion, a power that in a properly ordered universe would be incapable of belonging to an 11-year-old child. Super Saiyan 2, the second threshold. Gohan in Super Saiyan 2 is something that Cell, despite all his preparation and all his composite strength, was not ready for. The fight that follows is the most dramatic passage in the entire original Dragon Ball Z run. Not because of length, but because of what is at stake emotionally. Android 16, destroyed during the chaos, delivers his final words to Gohan. Gentle words about the value of protecting what matters, about the permission to fight when it is truly necessary. And those words land in Gohan at the exact moment when he needs them most. Cell is defeated. And then he is not, because Cell has a Saiyan cell structure, and the Saiyan cells respond to near death by producing a self-destruct sequence that will take the planet with him. Goku, understanding this, uses instant transmission to take Cell away from Earth to King Kai's planet, where Cell's explosion occurs without destroying the world below. King Kai dies. Goku dies. The world is saved. Cell regenerates, because his cells include Piccolo's regenerative ability. He returns, intent on finishing what he started. And Gohan, now without his father, with one working arm, with the full weight of what has been required of him settling into something fierce and clear, fires the father's son, Kamehameha. Goku's energy from somewhere beyond death joins Gohan's. The beam overtakes Cell. Cell is gone. Truly, finally gone. In the aftermath, the Dragon Balls are used. Most of the dead are restored. Goku, in an act of unexpected choice, asks to remain dead. He has, with his characteristic directness, made a calculation that the enemies who come for Earth tend to come because of him, because of the power he represents. If he stays dead, the world might find a longer peace. He says goodbye. He means it, in the particular way that Goku means things, fully, without drama, as simply as breathing. The 7 years that follow Cell's defeat are the longest continuous period of peace in Dragon Ball Z's timeline, and the story treats them with a particular kind of affection. The same affection that is sometimes reserved for things known to be temporary. The world continues. The Z fighters live their lives. Children are born and children grow. Gohan, the one who had saved everything, puts on a school uniform and discovers that academic life is its own kind of challenge. Vidal, the daughter of the man the world believes defeated Cell. Hercule, whose relationship with the truth is flexible but whose heart is genuine, enters the story during this period. She is perceptive, determined, and entirely unprepared for what she is about to learn about her new classmate with the orange gi and the carefully concealed tail. She learns the basics of ki use from Gohan. She learns to fly. She learns slowly the full shape of what Gohan is. Their relationship develops with the naturalness of two people discovering that what they want was standing next to them all along. Goten and Trunks grow up together as children of extraordinary power, and no particular concern about it. Goten, Goku's second son, achieves Super Saiyan as a child, not through emotional upheaval or a near-death experience, but apparently through the simple fact of being his father's son and training with his mother. The transformation that had been a legend, that had required the death of a friend and years of preparation to manifest in Goku, was achieved by Goten while sparring. The next generation does not know what they are inheriting. From the wider universe, a threat is assembling. Bibidi's son, the thin and obsessive wizard who has dedicated his entire existence to freeing Majin Buu, has been tracking sources of energy sufficient to power his scheme. He has found them. He has been watching the energy signatures of the most powerful fighters on Earth, using their ki to fuel the awakening of the being his father sealed away long ago. The tournament, the World Martial Arts Tournament that Gohan, Vidal, Goten, and Trunks all attend, becomes, without anyone knowing it, the final stage of Bibidi's preparation. Buu awakens. Buu, as he appears in Dragon Ball Z, is the softened version. Pink, round, almost childlike in behavior, if not in power. He emerged from his pod as something that bore, in its own distorted way, the traces of Daikeo's absorbed gentleness. He eats candy. He makes people into chocolate. He is simultaneously terrifying and absurd. And the combination is deliberate. The series is doing something specific with its tonal choices here, using Buu's apparent silliness to make his genuine destruction all the more unsettling. Vegeta, who has spent 7 years of peace in a private war with his own history, makes a choice during the Buu arc that is the culmination of everything his character has been building toward. He allows Babidi to reawaken the Majin energy within him, a power boost that returns him temporarily to a darkness he had been quietly moving away from. He does it because he wants one more fight with Goku, one more chance to be, however briefly, what he was before the years of peace began reshaping him. The fight he demands produces the key energy Babidi needed. Buu is fully awakened. Vegeta, in the fight that follows, sacrifices himself. He destroys himself in a final explosion, attempting to take Buu with him. It does not work. Buu regenerates, but the sacrifice is not nothing. It is Vegeta choosing, for the first time, to give everything not for his own pride, but for something else. For his son. For the world his family lives in. He dies in the posture of a fighter, and he does not come back from this death right away. And the honesty of that loss is something the Buu arc carries with it through everything that follows. The Buu arc demands more from the Z fighters than any previous conflict, because Buu is not simply powerful, he is impossible in the precise sense that he has no reliable weakness. He regenerates, he absorbs, he transforms. The form of Majin Buu that appeared from the pod was not his most powerful configuration. He can become something far more dangerous by absorbing sufficiently powerful beings. When he absorbs Gotenks, the fusion of Goten and Trunks, a wildly powerful being with an enormous flair for unnecessary attack names, and then Piccolo, the resulting Buu, is calculating and terrifying. When he eventually absorbs Gohan, the situation becomes genuinely desperate. The concept of fusion, two warriors combining their power and personality into a single, more powerful being, is introduced during this arc as a practical necessity. Goten and Trunks learn the fusion dance, a technique that requires perfect synchronization of movement and energy to produce Gotenks, a being of enormous power and a personality that combines both boys' qualities in a way that is often entertaining and sometimes worrying. Goku, back on Earth for a single day thanks to the permissions of the other world, teaches this technique from the afterlife, passing knowledge through the living world in the practical way he has always approached useful things. The Potara earrings introduce a different kind of fusion, a permanent Kai fusion that produces a being of combined identity rather than a temporary merger. Goku and Vegeta, in the final stages of the Buu conflict, use these earrings to become Vegito. Vegito is, in terms of pure combat power, the most powerful fusion in Dragon Ball Z's timeline to that point. An entity that carries both warriors' strength in a combination that exceeds the sum of its parts, and that navigates the situation with the particular confidence of someone who knows exactly how powerful they are and finds this fact moderately amusing. The ultimate resolution of the Buu conflict involves the Spirit Bomb on the largest scale the technique has ever been attempted, gathering energy not just from the living things on Earth, but from the entirety of the universe, focused through a restored King Kai network. It requires Goku's full power and the trust of every living being who contributes their energy. It requires Hercule, whose brave and genuine call to the people of Earth is one of the arc's finest moments. The man who was always pretending, finally becoming what he was pretending to be. The good Buu, the original pink form who had separated from the evil that had taken over, assists. He is the unexpected ally at the end, the part of the original Buu that never fully belonged to what Buu became. Buu is destroyed. The wish that restores all those killed by Buu is made. The world is once again whole. Dragon Ball GT occupies a specific and sometimes contested position in the Dragon Ball timeline. It continues the animated story of Goku and his companions into a new era, and while questions of its canonical relationship to Dragon Ball Super are complex, GT's own internal timeline contains events and developments that deserve careful attention. It is a series that begins with a child Goku, a regression caused by the accidental use of the Black Star Dragon Balls by the Emperor Pilaf, and expands over its run into territory that is ambitious and emotionally resonant in its final arc. The Baby Saga introduces an alien villain with a particular grievance. Baby is a Tuffle, a surviving remnant of the race that the Saiyans destroyed when they conquered Planet Plant. His vendetta is not illogical. His methods are possession and control. He infects and dominates the most powerful fighters on Earth, turning them into instruments of his own revenge. Watching the characters who have been part of the story for so long turned against Goku and each other has a specific emotional register that GT uses with care. Goku's response to Baby produces one of GT's most visually striking moments, the return of the Great Ape transformation, not in its standard form but as a Super Saiyan 4. Super Saiyan 4 is GT's unique contribution to the transformation history of the series, a form that draws on the Great Ape power but channels it through the Super Saiyan energy in a way that produces something new. Red fur, black hair, eyes of gold, a power that feels, in GT's presentation, like a synthesis of everything Goku is. The Shadow Dragon saga, which closes GT's story, is the series at its most thematically deliberate. The overuse of the Dragon Balls throughout the entire Dragon Ball timeline has been accumulating negative energy. Every wish, every use of the balls, every time the magic was invoked has left a residue. That residue has corrupted the Dragon Balls themselves, and from that corruption emerged the Shadow Dragons, one for each corrupted Dragon Ball, each one shaped by the nature of the wish that created it. They are, in a sense, the consequences, the cost of all the wishing, the bill that has been deferred through decades of use and has finally arrived. Omega Shenron, the final Shadow Dragon, is the culmination of all that accumulated darkness, a being of extraordinary power, whose very existence is the argument that even magic, even the most well-intentioned uses of Dragon Ball wishes, has limits that must be respected. Goku and Vegeta, fusing into Super Saiyan 4 Gogeta to challenge him, produce a moment of synchronized power that GT offers as its grandest visual statement. GT ends with a farewell that is among the most carefully considered final sequences in anime. Goku, circling the world on Shenron's back, saying goodbye to the people and places and purposes that have defined him. The universe, in GT's version of it, eventually passes the responsibility of protecting it to Pan and the next generation. Goku goes somewhere beyond the ordinary reach of story. The timeline does not precisely say where. Some things the story holds close and lets the quiet carry. Dragon Ball Super begins from a different angle than any previous Dragon Ball story. The tone is lighter at the start, the scale deliberately domestic. Goku as a farmer, Bulma planning a birthday party, the ordinary life of a world that has spent years recovering from the events of Dragon Ball Z. This is intentional. The series is establishing a baseline of normalcy before it reaches towards something new. The first new figure Super introduces is Beerus, the god of destruction for Universe 7. A being of extraordinary power and ordinary appetites who has been sleeping for the 39 years since he last destroyed anything and is now awake, hungry, and interested in a prophecy about a warrior called the Super Saiyan God. Beerus is attended by Whis, his angel attendant and martial arts teacher, who is calm in the way that beings of absolute power are sometimes calm, not because they don't have feelings, but because they have long since found a relationship with those feelings that does not require them to act on everyone. Beerus arrives on Earth looking for the Super Saiyan God. What follows, the ritual that produces the Super Saiyan God form, the battle between Goku and Beerus, the realization that Beerus was not going to destroy the Earth today, establishes the new scale of Dragon Ball Super's universe. Gods of destruction exist, and they are not merely powerful. They are categorically beyond what the Z-Fighters have been prepared for. The gap between the world Goku knew and the world Dragon Ball Super is exploring is enormous. The series will spend its entire run examining it. The Golden Frieza arc brings Frieza back, resurrected, trained for the first time in his existence, and in possession of a new transformation that achieves through dedicated work what Goku and Vegeta reached through crisis and meditation. Golden Frieza is what happens when someone of Frieza's native talent applies effort. It is terrifying. It is also, ultimately, insufficient, not because Frieza cannot match the power, but because he cannot match the endurance. His training was too short. His form burns through energy faster than he can sustain. The lesson Frieza refuses to learn, That persistence and patience matter more than power in the final analysis is the lesson the entire arc is built to demonstrate. Super Saiyan Blue emerges during this arc as the fusion of Super Saiyan with the Divine Ki accessed through God Ki training. It is a transformation of compressed intensity rather than raw force, the same energy as Super Saiyan God, but focused through the familiar Super Saiyan framework. Goku and Vegeta both achieve it. It becomes the signature form of Dragon Ball Super's middle era. One of Dragon Ball Super's most significant structural contributions to the timeline is its opening of the multiverse. Previous Dragon Ball stories had been contained mostly to Universe 7, the universe that includes Earth, planet Vegeta, Namek, and the worlds connected to them. Super reveals the full Xeno structure. 12 universes, each with its own gods, its own fighters, its own histories. Universe 6 becomes Goku and Vegeta's primary point of contact with this larger reality. Universe 6 contains Saiyans, a separate branch of the Saiyan people who were not conquered by Frieza's equivalent and who developed differently as a result. Kaba is the first Universe 6 Saiyan Goku and Vegeta meet, and Vegeta's interaction with him is one of Dragon Ball Super's most quietly meaningful moments. Vegeta teaches Kaba to access Super Saiyan by making him angry enough, by threatening what matters to him, using exactly the emotional mechanism that Vegeta himself has always refused to acknowledge in his own story. He passes something on. He becomes, in that moment, something he might not have recognized as himself from the outside, but that felt from the inside. Entirely right. Caulifla and Kale join Universe 6's fighter roster and represent the serious expansion of what Saiyan stories can look like. Kale's Berserker transformation, a power that overwhelms her control and moves through devastation like weather, echoes the legendary Saiyan of ancient prophecy in a way that the narrative acknowledges carefully. She is not Broly, but she is something that Broly's legend already pointed toward. The categories of Saiyan power Super reveals are broader than previously understood. Hit, Universe 6's assassin fighter, represents a different kind of challenge, one based not on power but on technique. His time skip ability, which creates a small gap in causality that he moves through while his opponents remain frozen, requires the Z fighters to think in ways that pure power increases cannot help with. Goku eventually counters it through a Kaioken application that moves faster than the skip can accommodate, but the encounter leaves the impression that power alone is never the final answer. Hit is one of Dragon Ball Super's most elegant character designs, in personality as much as appearance. The future Trunks arc of Dragon Ball Super returns to the alternate timeline that Dragon Ball Z introduced with Trunks, and it does so with a story that is darker and more philosophically engaged than Super's earlier arcs. The threat Trunks faces in his timeline is not a villain motivated by ambition or survival. It is a villain motivated by principle, or rather, by a principle so thoroughly distorted by arrogance that it has become its opposite. Zamasu is a Kai, a god from Universe 10, whose meditation on the nature of mortals has produced the conclusion that the mortals themselves are the universe's fundamental problem. They are violent, wasteful, imperfect, and insufficient. Their gods spend eternity managing them and they never improve. Zamasu decides that they should be eliminated. All of them, everywhere. This decision, reached through the careful logic of someone who has confused his perspective for objectivity, is Dragon Ball Super's deepest engagement with questions of authority and judgment. Zamasu has the power, or believes he can obtain the power, to act on his conclusions. He uses the Super Dragon Balls to steal Goku's body, producing a being called Goku Black, a Goku-shaped vessel for Zamasu's ideology, a thing that looks like the serious hero and acts like its most absolute villain. He also uses the Dragon Balls to grant himself immortality. The result, a future timeline in which a virtually immortal god wearing Goku's face is systematically eliminating humanity alongside a parallel immortal Zamasu, is the darkest setting Dragon Ball Super creates. Trunks' future is not a world under threat, it is a world being methodically unmade. by beings who believe they are doing the universe a service. Goku and Vegeta's repeated trips between the present and the future, working to develop a counter to something that cannot be permanently damaged, drive the arc's escalating urgency. The eventual fusion of the two Zamasus, producing fused Zamasus, a being of combined power and combined ideology, represents the arc's final statement that unchallenged conviction, allowed to grow without the friction of actual contact with the world it judges, becomes something monstrous. The resolution requires Xeno, the future Xeno brought to the present by Goku during the final crisis, wipes Trunks' timeline clean, not just Zamasu, but everything. It is the most extreme deployment of Xeno's power in Dragon Ball Super's run, and it lands with the weight of something that has no comfortable interpretation. The timeline that Trunks had spent his life defending no longer exists. He and Mai find a new timeline to live in. The arc ends not with triumph, but with a particular kind of sadness, the sadness of survival when the thing survived for has been erased. The Tournament of Power is Dragon Ball Super's grandest narrative construction, a competition between the 8 weakest universes, organized by Xeno where losing means erasure. 10 fighters from each universe, a single arena, the winner's universe continues, the losers are gone. Goku's role in creating the situation is one of Super's most honest character moments. It was Goku who suggested to Xeno that a tournament between universes might be interesting, and it is Goku who must live with the fact that his curiosity and his love of competition have created existential stakes for every universe that entered. The other fighters from Universe 7 look at him in those early preparations with a complicated expression. They know who he is. They know he did not mean harm. They also know what is going to happen to people who lose. The team Goku assembles includes fighters from across Dragon Ball Z's history: Vegeta, Gohan, Piccolo, Krillin, Android 17, Android 18, Tien, Master Roshi, and one addition that the series handles with the specific delicacy that Frieza's presence has always required. Frieza is brought back from the dead temporarily to serve as Universe 7's 10th fighter. He accepts. He has his own reasons. They are not the same as Goku's reasons. They are, for the duration of the tournament, aligned. The tournament arena itself is an achievement of Dragon Ball Super's visual storytelling, a flat circular platform in a void between universes. Crowded with fighters from realities the series had only gestured at before, Jiren, Universe 11's central fighter, establishes himself immediately as something beyond even what Super has shown before. He defeats challenges that would be decisive against any other opponent without apparent effort. He has power that is not the result of transformation or technique, but of something more fundamental, will concentrated to a point of extraordinary density. Ultra Instinct, Goku's final evolution in Dragon Ball Super, emerges from the encounter with Jiren as something that is not quite a transformation in the traditional sense. It is a state of combat that bypasses the deliberate mind entirely, where the body moves and responds and acts without the fraction of second delay that thinking requires. It is the martial arts ideal taken to its absolute conclusion. Master Roshi, watching Goku move in this state, recognizes it. He has spent his entire life working toward the edges of it. Whis has been attempting to teach it to Goku and Vegeta since their early super training sessions. It comes not because Goku finally understood Whis' lessons, but because Jiren pushed him past the point where understanding was possible and the body took over. The mastered form of Ultra Instinct, silver-haired, radiating a stillness at its center that contradicts the devastation around it, is Dragon Ball Super's final statement about what Goku is. Not the most powerful being in the universe, not a god in the formal sense, but something that has grown through decades and transformations and losses and recoveries into a fighter whose capacity to surprise the universe is not exhausted. Android 17's wish, when, as the tournament's sole surviving fighter, he faces the Super Dragon Balls, is the moment Dragon Ball Super earns every complicated thing it has done with its characters. He could wish for anything, He wishes to restore all erased universes. Every civilization, every planet, every fighter who was eliminated, all restored. The Grand Priest reveals, quietly, that this outcome had been Zeno's hope all along, that the tournament was, in part, a test, that the wish was always there as a possibility, available to whoever proved capable of reaching for something larger than themselves. Beyond the Dragon Ball Super anime, the ongoing manga has continued the timeline into territory that the animated series has not yet covered. These arcs are canon to the current Dragon Ball story, carrying the weight of official Akira Toriyama's supervision in the period before his passing. The Moro arc introduces a villain of ancient origin, a planet-devouring sorcerer who had been imprisoned for 10 million years, whose magic predates the structures of power that Goku and Vegeta have been operating within. Moro absorbs the life energy of planets, weakening fighters whose power draws from Ki while increasing his own. He is the kind of threat that requires solutions the series has not previously needed. Merus, an angel in training, sacrifices himself in ways that angels are not permitted to do. Goku develops a new application of Ultra Instinct beyond just combat. Vegeta travels to planet Yardrat to master a different technique, Spirit Fission, the ability to separate fused or absorbed entities, which becomes crucial to the arc's resolution. The Granola arc follows, centered on a survivor of a race called the Cerealians that was destroyed by Saiyans under Frieza's command. Granola uses the Dragon Balls of his world to wish to become the most powerful warrior in the universe. Gas, a fighter serving the Heaters, the manipulative group behind the arc, makes a similar wish shortly after. The arc examines the history of Frieza's empire in new detail, introducing Bardock in a flashback that reshapes understanding of Goku's father. Bardock, it emerges, had an encounter with the infant Granola and made a choice that was consistent with the humanity that had always been there beneath the Saiyan conditioning. The revelation does not change what Bardock was. It adds a dimension that makes the whole of him more complete. Goku's mastery of Ultra Instinct deepens in these arcs, a sign technique separate from the combat state, a more accessible and less taxing application. Vegeta's path diverges, accessing something called the Destruction State, drawing on the same power that Beerus uses as God of Destruction, a power of liberation from restraint that is different in quality from Ultra Instinct but comparable in scale. The two Saiyans continue growing in different directions, and the story continues treating that divergence as meaningful rather than simply parallel. Dragon Ball Super: Broly is the first film in the franchise to be directly written by Akira Toriyama, and it brings Broly, a character who had existed in non-canon films for decades, fully into official continuity with a completely reimagined origin. The film's Broly is not the one-dimensional rage engine of the earlier films. He is a character of genuine complexity, a Saiyan of extraordinary power who has been shaped by isolation and by the control of a father who treated him as an instrument rather than a person. Broly was born with a power level of 10,000, an absurdity by Saiyan standards, a number that made him a threat to King Vegeta's authority, and therefore a problem to be removed. His father, Paragus, rescued him from the planet his exile would have ended on, and spent decades raising him in conditions that kept his power suppressed and his loyalty directed. He has not lived as a warrior or been part of any history. He is, when the film begins, almost entirely a natural phenomenon wearing a Saiyan's face. His fight with Goku and Vegeta, which escalates into a battle of such sustained intensity that it forces Goku and Vegeta to use the Potara fusion and become Gogeta, is the centerpiece of a film that is also, at its edges, about kindness. Shilai and Limo, two members of Frieza's army who befriend Broly before understanding what he is, make the choice that ends the battle, using the Dragon Balls to wish Broly away from the fight before the conclusion can take a form they cannot undo. Broly is returned to his exile planet. Gogeta, who had been about to end the threat definitively, allows it. Goku, in the aftermath, visits Broly. He brings supplies. He brings his own presence, which is the thing he has always offered the people he meets. Simple, genuine interest in what they are and what they might become. He offers to train with him someday if Broly wants that. He leaves his scouter with the frequency set to the Kai signature Broly will be able to reach him on. It is the end of the film and the beginning of a story that has not yet been fully told. Broly is in the world now. He belongs to the timeline. What he becomes next is still open. The Dragon Ball timeline is not a simple line. It is a network of threads, some running parallel, some intersecting, some cutting backward across the others in the loops that time travel creates. There is the main timeline, the one that runs from Xeno's creation through Goku's childhood and the Red Ribbon Army and King Piccolo, and the Saiyans and Frieza and Cell and Buu and Beerus, and the Tournament of Power and beyond. There are the branching timelines that future Trunks carries with him, a future that was destroyed, a future that was given a different chance. There is Bardock's moment, a low-class warrior at the end of his world, making one last choice that the universe does not record, but that matters anyway. There is Piccolo's long road from Demon King's son to Earth's protector. There is Vegeta's arc, the longest, in some ways the most complete, from absolute pride to the particular kind of strength that comes from choosing something larger than oneself. There is Gohan's unfinished story, which Dragon Ball Superhero has opened a new chapter of, suggesting that the promise of that 11-year-old on the Cell Games arena has not been abandoned. And there is Goku, who began as a boy with a tail and a 4-star Dragon Ball in a forest clearing, who became a legendary warrior, who died twice and was reborn, who reached forms that should not have been possible and keeps reaching further, who greets every new opponent with the same simple happiness of someone who has never stopped believing that the fight is the most interesting thing in the world. The timeline holds all of these people. It holds all of their stories, their losses, their transformations, their ordinary days and extraordinary days. It holds the distant past when Xeno made his universes, and the present where the story is still being written, and the futures, plural, that have already been glimpsed through the particular lens of Dragon Ball's relationship with time. If you're still awake halfway through, maybe subscribe before you drift off, and tell me what time it is where you're watching from. There is a version of the Dragon Ball timeline told entirely through Krillin's eyes, and it is one of the most quietly extraordinary perspectives in the whole story. Krillin begins as a rival, a small, bald, aggressively competitive boy from the Oran Temple who arrives at Master Roshi's island with a specific intention of surpassing every other student. He meets Goku on the first day, finds him strange and impossible and probably annoying, and within weeks has become the closest thing to a best friend that Goku has ever had. The friendship that forms between them in those early training days is the emotional center of Dragon Ball that everything else grows around. Krillin is not, by the standards of the universe he lives in, a particularly powerful being. This is not a criticism. It is simply the truth of what the timeline records. That Krillin is the strongest human fighter of his era, and that the gap between the strongest human fighter and the beings who determine the fate of civilizations is very large. Krillin knows this. He has always known it. And he has never stopped showing up anyway. That choice, to keep showing up in situations that are, objectively, far beyond him, is what makes Krillin one of Dragon Ball Z's most honest characters. His first death comes during the original Dragon Ball series at the hands of a creature serving Piccolo's early operations, an act of casual violence that provokes Goku's rage and the defeat of that enemy. His second death on Namek is the one that changes the shape of the series. He dies quickly without the dramatic build-up that usually accompanies significant losses. And what his death produces in Goku is not grief in the ordinary sense, but something that bypasses the organized mind entirely and becomes something golden. Krillin's death on Namek is the sacrifice that unlocks the legend. He did not choose this. He did not volunteer. It simply happened, and it mattered more than almost anything else in the series. Between these deaths and the many times he is revived, Krillin lives a full life. He trains with a dedication that the more naturally gifted fighters around him do not always match. He develops techniques, the Destructo Disc, an energy blade of considerable precision, the solar flare, a blinding flash of light that is less a combat technique than a survival mechanism. He masters what his body can do in a way that Goku and Vegeta, always reaching for the next transformation, sometimes do not take the time to explore. He falls in love with Android 18. This, in itself, is one of Dragon Ball Z's most improbable and most affecting narrative choices. A human man, the strongest of his kind, but no match for the artificial beings who nearly ended the world. Falling genuinely in love with one of them, he uses his wish at the end of the Cell arc, not for power, not for restored life, but to remove the bomb from Android 18's body. It is the clearest possible statement of what matters to him, made with a dragon's wish and an absolute refusal to apologize for it. They build a life together. They have a daughter named Marin. The universe, which required so much of Krillin for so long, gives him something quiet and good in return. In Dragon Ball Super, Krillin trains again, his key sense refined, his self-knowledge deepened by the years of ordinary life, his courage no smaller than it ever was. He participates in the tournament of power. He is eliminated not through weakness, but through a sequence of circumstances that cost him nothing of what he is. He leaves the arena with the same dignity he brought to everything. And the image of him watching from the sidelines, rooting for his team with everything he has, is as true a picture of who he is as any moment in battle. The Dragon Ball timeline includes a martial arts tradition that runs alongside the Turtle School without ever quite intersecting it. The Crane School, and the fighters it produced. Tien Shinhan and Chiaotzu arrive in the original series as rivals and potential antagonists, shaped by a teacher whose philosophy ran counter to everything Master Roshi stood for. Where Roshi's approach cultivated strength in service of protection, the Crane hermit Suru Sen Nin had developed a martial arts tradition that placed power over principle, that valued results without asking what the results were for. Tien, when first encountered, is precise, cold, and entirely certain of his own superiority. He has 3 eyes. His third eye, positioned in the center of his forehead, is not decorative. It provides an additional dimension of perception that ordinary fighters cannot access, and Tien has spent years learning to use it. His technique is formidable. His Ki Blast, the Tri-Beam, later expanded into the Neo Tri-Beam, draws on the user's own life force rather than a reserve of Ki, meaning it can exceed the power that Tien's body would normally be able to produce. At the cost of his own vitality, it is a technique that says something about its user, someone willing to spend themselves genuinely when something matters enough. Something changed in Tien at the 22nd World Martial Arts Tournament. He watched Goku fight without the ambition that usually colored his own approach to combat, and he found in that watching something he had not previously had access to: doubt. Not about his ability, but about what he was doing with it. The question of what strength is for does not have a quick answer, but Tien began asking it, and the asking moved him away from the Crane School's ideology and towards something he worked out largely on his own. He trained alone for much of Dragon Ball Z's later run. He developed the Spirit Tri-Beam to a degree that allowed him, briefly, to genuinely trouble Cell, to keep the perfect being from absorbing Android 18 through a sustained barrage of energy that cost Tien seriously but bought the time that mattered. It is one of Dragon Ball Z's most underappreciated sequences, a human being, with no transformation available, holding a being of incomprehensible power in place through the simple force of willingness to keep spending what he has. Chiaotzu, small, pale, possessed of psychic abilities that make him unique among Earth's fighters, is defined most clearly by his loyalty to Tien. When the Saiyans come and Nappa is tearing through the Earth's defenders, Chiaotzu attempts to sacrifice himself, to explode himself against Nappa, to use everything he is as a last weapon. It does not work. Nappa survives, but Chiaotzu chose to give everything without hesitation, and that is not nothing. Tien's response, the grief that comes through him when he realizes Chiaotzu is gone, is one of the original Dragon Ball Z's most honest emotional moments. The two of them train through every era of the story, maintaining their practice in the wilderness while the world changes around them. They are not, by Dragon Ball Super's era, anywhere near the power levels of Goku or Vegeta, or even the humans who have had access to divine ki training. They are what they always were, human fighters who understood something important about what it means to use strength in service of something outside yourself, and who never stopped working, and who appear when they are needed with the quiet reliability of things that have been there all along. The Ginyu Force deserves more consideration than the Dragon Ball timeline's forward momentum usually allows time for. They are, on the surface, comic figures. 5 fighters who announce their arrival with choreographed poses, who treat their assignments as performances, who have named their finishing moves with the theatrical commitment of people who believe completely in what they are doing. The surface is real, and beneath it, they are among the strongest fighters in Frieza's empire, assigned exclusively to operations that require abilities beyond what Frieza's standard forces can handle. Captain Ginyu is the most interesting of them, partly because his technique, body change, the ability to switch bodies with another person, is so philosophically strange. It is not a combat technique in any conventional sense. It is an act of displacement, of becoming someone else from the inside out while leaving them trapped in what you have discarded. Ginyu uses it against Goku on Namek, and the sequence that follows, Goku operating in Ginyu's damaged body, Ginyu discovering that Goku's body cannot be fully utilized without the key control its original owner spent a lifetime developing. Is Dragon Ball Z making a quiet argument about the relationship between power and the person who holds it? Jeez is the last surviving member of the Ginyu Force on Namek, and his loyalty to Ginyu, his genuine distress at watching the captain defeated and body switched, is one of the arc's small emotional grace notes. The Ginyu Force's excessive confidence is, in its own way, a portrait of what Frieza's empire produces. Beings who have been so successful for so long within a specific hierarchy that they have no framework for encountering something outside that hierarchy. When Vegeta dispatches them, he does so with an efficiency that is almost clinical. He is not impressed by their poses. He has never been impressed by performance without substance. What the Ginyu Force represents in the larger timeline is the culture of Frieza's empire, the normalization of violence as entertainment, the ranking of lives by power level, the organization of genuine atrocity into a system that its participants can feel good about. They are not exceptional villains. They are the ordinary products of an ordinary structure. And ordinary structures of that kind are, the Dragon Ball timeline suggests with quiet consistency, more dangerous than any individual monster because they are self-sustaining in ways that monsters are not. The transformation of Piccolo Jr. from Demon King's heir to Earth's guardian and Gohan's surrogate father is the longest and most complete character arc in the Dragon Ball timeline. It begins with rage and inheritance, a being born to continue his father's work, carrying in his genetic memory all of King Piccolo's resentment and ambition and power. And it ends with a being who has chosen, through accumulation of small decisions over many years, to become something his origin made categorically impossible. The early Piccolo is not pretending to be a villain. He is not a good being biding his time. He is genuinely committed to the goal of conquering the world, and his training between the original Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z is dedicated entirely to that goal. He trains alone in harsh conditions with total focus. He develops his power with the methodical intensity of someone who knows exactly what they are working toward. He does not need companionship or approval. He needs to be the most powerful thing in the universe, and he is entirely willing to put in the work. What begins to change him is, first, the arrival of Raditz, the realization that the universe is larger than the world he has been trying to claim, and that the enemies arriving from outside it will reach his territory too. Then Gohan. The moment Piccolo takes Gohan into the wilderness to train him for the Saiyan invasion is the pivot of his entire arc. He does not want to care about this child. He takes the assignment because Gohan's potential is real, and because developing that potential serves his own eventual purposes. But children have a way of requiring care that does not wait for permission, and Piccolo finds himself, without deciding to, without any moment of conscious choice, protecting a small person from a world that is too large for him. The protection of Gohan during the Saiyan invasion costs Piccolo his life. It is the most significant act in his arc to that point, and it is also for Piccolo the most clarifying. He has spent his entire existence wanting power over things. He dies giving himself up for something small and powerless. These two facts belong together, and after he is restored, Piccolo carries them together without needing to explain the relationship between them. On Namek, fusing with Nail gives Piccolo access to something else, not just power, but a piece of Namekian history and culture that he had never fully inhabited. He is a Namekian, but he has been, since his emergence from the egg on the floor of a tournament arena, entirely disconnected from Namek and its people. Nail's presence within him is a kind of homecoming that Piccolo did not ask for and cannot entirely resist. He becomes, in some quiet way, more whole. The fusion with Kami, the single act that allows Dende to become Earth's new guardian and that restores the Dragon Balls, is the completion of Piccolo's inner arc. He has spent his existence as the separated dark half of a being who had divided himself. Reuniting with Kami does not make Piccolo good in a simple sense. It makes him complete in a sense that good and evil are subsets of. He is, after that fusion, exactly what he has become, a being who has traveled from the darkest possible origin to the place where he chooses, with full knowledge of everything he is, to protect. In the later Dragon Ball Super arcs, Piccolo's role deepens into mentorship and strategy. He trains Gohan again in Dragon Ball Super, Hero pushing him toward a form that Gohan's own anxiety and academic detachment had kept him from reaching. He is injured, protecting Pan, Gohan's daughter, and the sight of that sacrifice does for Gohan what the sight of Piccolo protecting him had done for Piccolo himself, decades earlier. The arc completes. The pattern passes forward. What was given to Gohan is given, through Gohan, to the next generation. The androids of Dragon Ball Z are connected to a history that predates their appearance in the story by decades. Dr. Gero, the head scientist of the Red Ribbon Army, the organization that Goku had dismantled single-handedly during the original Dragon Ball era, did not disappear when his organization was destroyed. He retreated. He rebuilt, and he spent the rest of his long life working toward a revenge whose scope was, in retrospect, characteristic of someone who had confused a personal humiliation with a cosmic injustice. The Red Ribbon Army's scientific division had been producing enhanced humans and robots for military purposes since before the Dragon Ball era's beginning. Dr. Gero was its most capable mind, a scientist of genuine brilliance operating in service of an organization whose ambitions were small compared to his own. When the army was destroyed, Gero lost his institutional support but kept his knowledge, his laboratory, and the tiny tracker drones that he had seeded across the atmosphere of Earth to collect combat data on the most powerful fighters the planet produced. Those drones gathered data for decades. They watched Goku, Piccolo, Gohan, Vegeta. They recorded technique, power levels, genetic information. They fed it all back to a laboratory in the mountains of the northern continent, where Gero worked in careful isolation on a project that grew more ambitious with each passing year. The androids he created were not all identical in design philosophy. Some were purely mechanical, 19, his most recent creation, and Gero himself, who had eventually transferred his own consciousness into an android body to extend his operational lifespan. Some were organic humans fundamentally restructured at the cellular level, 17 and 18, siblings taken and converted against their will, their bodies rebuilt and their power multiplied far beyond what any human could naturally achieve. And then there was the project that was not finished by the time Trunks' history diverged from the main timeline, Cell. Cell's design was, by any standard, Gero's masterwork. He had spent more time on Cell's foundations than on any other creation, because Cell was intended to achieve what no other android could: genuine perfection. Not through upgrades or modifications, but through the integration of the best qualities of every powerful fighter whose data Gero's drones had collected. The engineering required to make those elements compatible, to create a biology that could host the combined potential of Goku, Frieza, Piccolo, Vegeta, and the others, was the work of decades. Cell was not a weapon in any conventional sense. He was an argument, Gero's final statement that he could build something better than anything nature had produced. Android 16's place in this history is particularly poignant. He was, by the best available evidence, modeled on Gero's own son, a young man who had died long before the events of Dragon Ball Z. Where 17 and 18 carried the modified consciousness of real people who had been taken and changed, 16 was a new construction. And in that newness, Gero had perhaps allowed himself more latitude with the personality architecture than the purely military framing would usually permit. 16 loves birds. He processes the value of life in a way that the other androids do not. He has no kill switch embedded in his desire for violence, because that desire was never installed. He is, within the context of Gero's project, an anomaly. And in Dragon Ball Z's structural logic, anomalies tend to arrive precisely when they are needed. The hyperbolic time chamber, Room of Spirit and Time, as the Japanese title has it, is one of Dragon Ball Z's most evocative settings, and it deserves attention not just as a training location, but as a space with its own internal logic and its own particular quality of experience. It is a room within the lookout, accessible through a specific door that contains within it a complete artificial environment where a single day in the outside world corresponds to a year inside. The gravity is 10 times Earth standard. The temperature swings between extremes that would be fatal to ordinary humans. The food available is limited and barely sustaining. The environment in its white emptiness offers none of the ordinary markers of time and progress that training in the outside world provides. Kami built the chamber as a space of extreme development, a place where a fighter could compress years of training into days. But the design came with limits built in. A person could only spend 2 days total inside the chamber in their lifetime, 2 years of subjective experience, more than that, and the body loses its ability to find the door back to the outside world. The chamber has claimed people, has held them in its white emptiness beyond the point of return, not through malice but through physics. Goku and Gohan enter the chamber in preparation for the Cell Games, and what happens in there is the most important developmental passage either of them undergoes in Dragon Ball Z. Goku pushes Gohan with a patience that seems gentle from the outside and is, from the inside, relentless. He maintains the Super Saiyan state until it becomes comfortable, until the body forgets the effort it used to require, until it is simply the resting state and the power it provides is available without cost. He wants Gohan to reach the same familiarity, and he wants something else from Gohan, something beyond what training can produce, something that has to come from Gohan himself. The breakthrough does not come inside the chamber. It comes in the arena. But the foundation that was laid in that white space, in those compressed months of father and son training together in a place outside ordinary time, is what makes the breakthrough possible. The chamber does not produce Super Saiyan 2. It produces the readiness. And readiness, in Dragon Ball Z's understanding of these things, is what transformation waits for. Vegeta and Trunks use the chamber differently. They come out in full Super Saiyan states that they have mastered so completely that the transformation has lost its visual drama. They are simply Super Saiyans in the way that water is simply wet. They have, in their time inside, optimized. But optimization has its own ceiling, and what they emerge with, while impressive, is not the threshold crossing development that Goku had been working toward for his son. The chamber appears again in later Dragon Ball arcs, in the Buu saga, where Goten and Trunks use it to prepare for their fusion dance, and where Gotenks trains within it and tests the limits of what the fused form is capable of. Each time the chamber is used, The story is making a point about the relationship between compressed time and genuine development. The idea that you can accelerate the hours, but you cannot accelerate the understanding. That certain kinds of growth have their own internal pace that a training environment can press against but cannot fully override. Gohan's arc in the Dragon Ball timeline is the one that generates the most conversation because it is the one that contains the most explicit promise and the most apparent deviation from what that promise seemed to suggest. He is introduced as extraordinary, the son of the most powerful warrior on earth, with a latent power that his father recognizes even through the child's tears and reluctance. He develops through Dragon Ball Z in a consistent direction, toward something that exceeds what Goku achieved, toward a form that is not Super Saiyan in the traditional sense, but something orthogonal to it, something native to Gohan specifically. The Cell games seem to be the fulfillment of that arc. He achieves the second threshold, he saves the world, he does what Goku, in Goku's own assessment, could not have done. And then, in the years that follow, something different happens. Gohan becomes a scholar. He attends school. He falls in love. He puts away the training that the world required of him because the world, in those 7 years of peace, does not seem to require it. Chi-Chi's vision of his future, the academic path, the life of the mind, the removal from the violence that has shaped his childhood, is, for those years, the life he lives. There are readings of this that are critical, that Gohan wasted his potential, that the story failed to follow through on what it had established. There are readings that are more generous, that a child who was forced to be a weapon for the world's protection has every right to choose, in peacetime, to be something else. Both readings are present in the text. The story does not resolve the tension between them, and that irresolution may be the point. What does the world owe someone it required so much of so young? What does that person owe back? Dragon Ball does not give a clean answer. What Dragon Ball Superhero offers is the third possibility, not that Gohan abandoned his potential, and not that he was wrong to step back from warrior life, but that the two things he is, scholar and fighter, have never been in opposition, that he can be both, and that the form he unlocks in that film, the reddish, fully released power state that scholars sometimes call Final Gohan or Beast Gohan, is not the completion of the warrior arc at the expense of everything else. It is the completion of Gohan himself. The years of ordinary life are not wasted. They are what he needed to become someone who fights from choice rather than from necessity, from love rather than from fear. The Great Saiyaman is one of Dragon Ball Z's most affectionate gestures towards its own audience. Gohan, attending high school in the years after Cell, wants to keep his identity as a fighter hidden, both because of the promise to his mother and because of the genuine desire to live as an ordinary student. The problem is that extraordinary things keep happening around him. Criminals, emergencies, the inevitable gap between a world that needs help and a person who can provide it. His solution is a disguise, a full bodysuit, a helmet, dramatic poses, a name, the Great Saiyaman. He announces himself to criminals with the theatrical seriousness of someone who has never watched himself from the outside, and the criminals he encounters do not know what to make of him. And the students who see him on the news find him perplexing, and Vidal, who has inherited her father's investigative instincts without his capacity for self-deception, begins very quickly to suspect that the Great Saiyaman and her new classmate are the same person. The Great Saiyaman era is brief in the timeline, but it is worth dwelling on because of what it represents. Gohan trying to be both things at once. He wants the ordinary life and he wants to be useful, and the costume is his awkward, earnest attempt to have both without having to choose. It works imperfectly, in the way that earnest attempts at impossible balances usually work. Vidal finds out. He teaches her to fly. The ordinary life and the fighter's life begin to merge not by force, but by the patient accumulation of honest moments between two people learning to trust each other. The 25th World Martial Arts Tournament, which this era leads into, is Dragon Ball Z's gentlest arc. A reunion of characters, a chance for the next generation to be seen, A breathing space before the Buu saga's darker chapters arrive. Goku gets one day of living leave from the other side to participate. He meets his second son, Goten, for the first time as a person rather than an infant. He watches his friends and family with the specific quality of attention that someone gives to things they know they are seeing for a limited time. It is, for all its lightness, one of Dragon Ball Z's most quietly moving stretches. To understand the Dragon Ball timeline's first great arc, it is necessary to understand the scale of what Frieza actually built. His empire was not a small operation, and the Namek saga does not take place in a vacuum. It takes place against the backdrop of a galactic organization that had been running, in one form or another, for generations. Frieza did not inherit a small operation and expand it. He built something whose reach extended across significant portions of Universe 7, whose bureaucracy processed the subjugation and sale of planets with the efficiency of a commercial enterprise, and whose reputation was so thoroughly established that entire civilizations surrendered before a single battle was fought. The force structure of Frieza's empire had distinct tiers. At the bottom were the rank-and-file soldiers, members of various species recruited or conscripted, carrying standard energy weapons and operating in the kinds of large groups that offset individual weakness with numbers. Above them were the named fighters, Carbon, Dodoria, the Ginyu Force, beings of genuine combat power who handled assignments that required more than numbers could provide. And above all of them, unreachable in practice even for those who served him directly, was Frieza himself. Zarbon is worth a moment's attention. He is elegant, carefully self-presented, possessed of a loyalty to Frieza that reads as genuine rather than performed. He also has a transformation, a brutal, enlarged combat form that he keeps hidden out of preference for his refined appearance, deploying it only when the situation demands. The gap between his public face and his battle form is Dragon Ball Z's small portrait of the Empire's underlying character, something that presents as refined and organized, but is underneath always capable of becoming something cruder and more violent. Dodoria represents the opposite end of that spectrum, bulk without refinement, force without finesse, effective in exactly the way that something heavy and fast is effective. He does not care about how he appears. He cares about outcomes. In the Namek arc, he is the one dispatched to handle the complications in the Namekian villages, because his methods are effective and because Frieza has no particular concern about how those methods register. The empire Frieza built is, by the Namek arc, already in a kind of slow decline that the Namek crisis will accelerate. The defeat on Namek, the destruction of Frieza himself, the loss of the Ginyu Force, these remove the most capable elements of an organization whose infrastructure had been built around the assumption of Frieza's invincibility. When that assumption is removed, the Empire does not so much collapse as deflate. It continues in various reduced forms through Dragon Ball Super, but it is never again the force that once cleared entire civilizations from the galaxy's map. King Kai, the North Kai, is one of the Dragon Ball timeline's most lovable and most underestimated figures. He is a god. His designation places him as the overseer of the northern quadrant of Universe 7, responsible for the planets and peoples within that sector, with a wisdom and awareness that the North Kai possesses in genuine abundance. He is also, by universal standards, not especially powerful. He has a car. He tells jokes that land poorly with everyone who hears them. He lives on a planet so small that the horizon is visible at every turn, on a road so short that walking its length takes minutes rather than the day's Snakeway's entrance deceptively implies. His training methods are practical and specific. He taught Goku techniques unavailable elsewhere, the Spirit Bomb, the Kaioken, the deeper understanding of ki sensing that allows perception across vast distances. He passed on what he knew with the straightforward generosity of someone who understands that knowledge grows by being given away. The Spirit Bomb in particular carries in its nature something of North Kai's philosophy. It is not a technique born from the individual fighter's power, but from the willingness of living things to contribute what they have toward a shared purpose. It requires a quality in the user that pure power training cannot develop. King Kai's death during the Cell arc, caught on his small planet when Goku uses instant transmission to transport Cell's explosion away from Earth, is handled with the same gentle humor that defines his character. He is annoyed. He had a car he was proud of. He is also, in whatever way matters, fine. Death in Dragon Ball's universe is rarely truly final, as the entire history of the Dragon Balls demonstrates, and the afterlife is a large and interesting place. He remains in contact with the Z Fighters through telepathy throughout the Buu saga, serving as messenger and guide in the way that only someone with a god's awareness of the other side can manage. The relationship between King Kai and Goku is the timeline's clearest example of the teacher who learns from the student. Kai trained Goku to a level that exceeded his original expectations. He watched Goku go beyond Super Saiyan, beyond every technique he had taught, into forms that his own understanding could not fully contain. And rather than being diminished by this, King Kai simply adjusted his pride, from the pride of the master whose student performs as expected to the deeper pride of the master whose student has rendered all expectations obsolete. He cares about Goku in the precise way that the most genuine teachers care about the people they have genuinely taught, and no amount of power differential changes that. Whis is the most significant angel in Dragon Ball Super's accessible story, but he is representative of a tier of beings whose full nature the series only partially illuminates. The angels are the attendants and teachers of the gods of destruction, one per universe, assigned to their charge with what appears to be permanent tenure, responsible for maintaining the god of destruction's capabilities and guiding them toward the role they are meant to serve. They are, by all observable measures, more powerful than the gods they serve, much more powerful. This creates a dynamic that Dragon Ball Super handles with characteristic understatement. Whis serves Beerus with genuine care and occasional exasperation. He makes his breakfast. He wakes him from thousand-year naps with careful timing. He carries him through space at speeds that exceed anything Beerus himself can manage. And he watches, with patient amusement, as Beerus moves through his role with the confidence of someone who does not know, or perhaps does not need to know, that his guide is stronger than he is. Whis begins training Goku and Vegeta in Dragon Ball Super's early arcs, and the techniques he introduces them to are different in kind from anything previous training has offered. He teaches not power but movement, not the accumulation of energy but the refinement of how the body relates to energy, how a fighter can stop thinking about each movement and allow the body to respond before thought can interfere. Ultra Instinct, as Goku eventually achieves it, is the destination that Whis' early lessons point toward. It takes years for Goku to reach it, through the extremity of the Tournament of Power and the specific pressure of Jiren's challenge, but the seed was planted in those early morning training sessions on Beerus' planet. The angels exist within a structure above even Zeno's immediate awareness, or at least above the layer of the divine hierarchy that the series makes fully visible. The Grand Priest, father of all angels, serves as Zeno's attendant and organizer, managing the administrative functions of the Omni King's rule with a precision that implies something careful about the relationship between power and its management. The angels, unlike the gods of destruction, do not take sides in conflicts. They observe, they assist, they maintain a neutrality that Merus, the trainee angel in the moral arc, violates to his cost, understanding what his violation will require of him, and making the choice anyway. What the angels know that no one else does is never fully stated. Their longevity exceeds that of even the gods of destruction. They have watched cycles of universes that the current inhabitants have no record of. What they have seen, and what that seeing has taught them, is the quiet mystery at the center of the divine hierarchy, the thing that Ultra Instinct gestures toward, but does not fully name. To trace the Dragon Balls through the timeline is to trace the shape of the story itself, because wherever the Dragon Balls appear, a turning point follows. They are not simply the objects the story is named for. They are the hinge on which each arc turns, the mechanism by which consequences are established and sometimes unwound. In the original Dragon Ball series, the Dragon Balls are the reason the story begins. Bulma's search for them is what brings her to Goku, and Goku's attachment to the four-star ball is the first piece of genuine emotion the series establishes. The first set of wishes in the timeline are simple, personal, relatively modest, fitting for a story that has not yet found its larger scale. But the pattern is established: gather, summon, wish, wait for the year of recharge. On Namek, the Dragon Balls become something worth dying for and dying over. Frieza wants them for immortality. The Z fighters want them to restore the dead. The wishes that are actually made from Namek's balls across multiple gatherings and partial gatherings restore Piccolo, transport him to Namek, and eventually restore all those killed by Frieza. Each wish has weight, each wish costs something. The effort required to obtain the ball, the danger involved, the year of stone that follows each use. The balls are not free, they never were. The wish that ends the Cell arc, Shenron restoring those killed by Cell, is made by a young boy named Dende, who has by that point become Earth's guardian and who speaks the wish into the golden air with the quiet authority of someone who understands what they are doing. The wish is specific, carefully bounded, chosen from among the possibilities available. This precision is what makes the Dragon Ball wishes interesting. They require thought. They require the person making them to know what they actually want, which is harder than it appears. In Dragon Ball Super, the Super Dragon Balls are used to restore universes, to reshape reality at the largest available scale. The gap between the wish Bulma made for the perfect boyfriend in the original series and the wish Android 17 makes to restore every erased universe at the Tournament of Powers End is the gap the entire Dragon Ball timeline has traversed. The same basic mechanism, gather, summon, speak, has been applied to objects of increasingly enormous consequence by people whose understanding of consequence has grown accordingly. Planet Vegeta, in the final hours before its destruction, was a world still believing in its own future. The Saiyans who lived there, the warriors, the low-class soldiers, the royalty who occupied the upper tiers of a hierarchy shaped entirely by power, were not aware of what was coming. Frieza's decision had been made quietly, as his important decisions generally were, without announcement or ceremony. He did not believe the Saiyans deserved a speech. He believed the problem required a solution, and he applied one. The planet itself was unremarkable by galactic standards. Heavy gravity, reddish light from a distant sun, a landscape shaped by a history of violence, both geological and social. The cities that had grown on it were functional rather than beautiful, organized around the needs of a warrior culture that valued capacity over aesthetics. The technology that had developed there was largely borrowed from the Tuffles who had built it before the Saiyans took it, from the various civilizations whose planetary spoils the Saiyans had carried home. It was not an innocent world, but it was home to people who had never asked for Frieza's empire or the role it assigned them. The Saiyans who died when the planet was destroyed were not all soldiers. The timeline's habit of depicting them primarily as warriors sometimes obscures the fact that they were also a people, that there were children on planet Vegeta and elders and whoever the Saiyan equivalents of farmers and craftspeople and cooks were. All of that was erased in the moment Frieza's energy sphere struck the surface. All of it became the dark matter of history. Not gone exactly, but no longer accessible to the living. Vegeta carries this. He has carried it since he was a child, taken off the planet by its destroyer before the destroyer acted. He was made to serve the person who killed his people. He had no framework for responding to this that the Saiyan culture he had been raised in could provide, because Saiyan culture did not include a category for powerless grief. What it included was pride and ambition and the absolute refusal to accept a position below what one deserved. Vegeta turned those tools on the wound and built from them the particular kind of person he spent Dragon Ball Z being, someone whose enormous capability was always underneath, in service of a grief he would not name. When he names it on Namek, when he tells Goku, In those final moments, what Frieza did to their people and weeps with the honesty of someone who has run out of armor. It is the most significant single moment in Vegeta's arc, not because the naming changes anything about what happened, but because it changes what Vegeta has access to. The grief, once named, becomes something he can work with rather than something that works through him without his knowledge. Master Roshi is, depending on how you count, the most historically significant figure in the Dragon Ball timeline who is not a god or a Saiyan. He trained the fighters who shaped the world. He developed the Kamehameha. He established the philosophical framework, strength in service of others, combat as a path to wisdom that every hero in the series has inherited in some form. He has been old for the entire timeline's accessible history, and he will probably be old for however long the story continues. And this is entirely consistent with his nature as someone who has spent so long developing himself that he has arrived at a kind of settled permanence. His actual age is uncertain. His power in the original Dragon Ball was sufficient to make him the most capable human fighter of that era. And his technique included the Kamehameha, which he had spent 50 years developing, and the ability to transform himself temporarily into a state of full physical capability that he normally conceals behind his aged appearance. He developed this concealment deliberately, because he understood that a teacher who appears limited encourages students to reach past apparent limits, while a teacher who reveals full capability too early gives the student a ceiling to work toward rather than a horizon to move beyond. His participation in the Tournament of Power in Dragon Ball Super is one of the series' most quietly moving passages. Roshi is not, in that era, a competitive fighter by the tournament standards. He knows this. He participates anyway, and in participating he demonstrates something that the more powerful fighters around him sometimes lose track of. That technique and experience and the deep knowledge of one's own capabilities can achieve things that raw power reaches for and misses. He fights with everything he has. He pushes himself to failure and beyond it. He is eliminated with dignity. What he represents in the timeline is the long arc of commitment, the picture of what happens when a person dedicates a lifetime to the development of something they believe in. The Kamehameha is his legacy, and it outlives him in every fighter who has inherited it. The philosophical tradition of the Turtle School is his legacy, and it lives in Goku, in Krillin, in Yamcha, in every person who trained on that island in the sun and learned that strength is not the point, that the point is what you use strength for. The Dragon Ball timeline in its full length contains more quiet moments than it is usually given credit for. The battles are what people remember, the transformations are what people describe. But between them, the story has always been careful to include the ordinary textures of the lives it depicts. The mornings before training, the meals after battles, the conversations that happen in the spaces between crises, Goku eating. This is a constant of the timeline, reliable as sunrise. Goku consuming enormous quantities of food with the undiscriminating enthusiasm of a body that burns energy at a rate that ordinary appetites cannot sustain. The meals he shares with the Z fighters across the arc of Dragon Ball Z and Super are small rituals of normalcy, punctuation marks in a story that would otherwise lose its human scale. Bulma's capsule technology. The world of Dragon Ball functions as it does because of this invention, because a plane can fit in a pocket, because a laboratory can be carried in a briefcase, because the logistical problems of living in a world where dramatic battles can happen anywhere are solved by technology that has made the impractical practical. The Dragon Ball universe is, in its daily operations, a comfortable world. Its crises are extreme, but the baseline it returns to between them is a world that Bulma's family helped build. The friendships, Goku and Krillin, whose bond begins in childhood competition and deepens through every shared danger. Gohan and Piccolo, whose relationship has no adequate name in any category the series provides. Vegeta and Bulma, whose partnership between a Saiyan prince and a human genius is one of the series' most structurally improbable and emotionally convincing arrangements. These relationships are what the battles are for. They are what the Dragon Balls restore. They are what the timeline is ultimately about. Not the power levels or the transformations or the scale of the enemies defeated, but the simple, persistent, apparently indestructible fact of the people who chose each other. The Dragon Ball timeline is very long, and it is very wide, and it holds all of these things with equal care. The first wish and the last. The smallest creature on the smallest planet, and the Omni King who holds every universe in his hands with the lightness of someone who does not know what worry is. The boy with the 4-star ball in the forest, and the man who has touched the ceiling of what a living being can become and keeps reaching anyway. Dragon Ball has been told in many forms across the decades of its life. The manga, drawn by Akira Toriyama, with a visual vocabulary that made the most extraordinary events feel kinetic and immediate and real. The original anime, which ran alongside and then beyond the manga, with a tone that shifted subtly between its comedic and dramatic registers. Dragon Ball Z, which arrived in the late 1980s in Japan and spent its run becoming one of the most widely seen animated series in the world. The films, the specials, the continuation in Super and beyond. Each form carries the same essential story, and each form adds something of its own. The manga's visual storytelling is direct in a way that animation must translate. A punch in the manga is a line and a shape and a white space, and the reader's imagination fills in the movement. The anime gives that movement time, gives the energy a sound and a color, allows the battles to exist in duration as well as in impact. These are different experiences of the same narrative, and the timeline holds all of them. Toriyama's approach to the story was, by his own account, often improvisational. Characters who were introduced as minor became central. Villains whose defeat seemed final returned in forms no one had anticipated. The timeline's occasional structural looseness, the moments where something established in one arc does not quite align with something in another, is the record of a creative process that valued forward momentum and surprise over architectural consistency. This is not a criticism. It is one of the reasons the story feels alive rather than planned, because it was, in significant ways, discovered rather than designed. The love for Dragon Ball that has sustained its audience for decades is connected to this quality of aliveness. A story that always surprises its own author will tend to surprise its readers. A universe that keeps finding new forms, new threats, new dimensions of its own character's potential is a universe worth returning to. The Dragon Ball timeline is long because the story kept finding reasons to continue, kept finding new things it wanted to explore, kept generating in its characters and its world enough genuine possibility to sustain another chapter and then another. That is what a good story does. It makes itself necessary. It becomes the place you return to when the ordinary world has been too much, or when you need the particular comfort of a universe that always, eventually, finds its way back to something like peace. The Dragon Balls are the title and the center of the story, and they are worth considering on their own terms, not simply as a plot device but as an element of what Dragon Ball is saying about the relationship between wish and consequence. Every use of the Dragon Balls in the timeline is an event. Every wish changes something, and as Dragon Ball GT makes explicit with the Shadow Dragon arc, those changes accumulate. The balls are not neutral. They are not simply tools. They hold within them the memory of everything they have been asked to do. The original Earth Dragon Balls, created by Kami, can grant a single wish per gathering. Their dragon Shenron is vast and dark-scaled and carries an authority that even casual viewers feel. His voice does not explain, does not negotiate, does not apologize. He grants or refuses with equal brevity. He has his limits, and those limits are connected to the power of his creator. As the guardians of the earth have changed, the balls have changed with them. When Piccolo fused with Kami and Dende became the new Kami, Shenron's power expanded, 3 wishes instead of 1, the ability to revive multiple people simultaneously, a scope of possibility that the original Kami's caution had not allowed. The Namekian Dragon Balls, Porunga's balls, larger and start differently from Shenron's, summoning a dragon who is in many ways the opposite of Shenron in personality, were designed for 3 wishes from their origin. Porunga is not cold or brief. He communicates in a way that feels almost conversational for something of his scale. And the Namekian language required to interact with him carries within it the requirement of a kind of intentional contact that the Earth balls do not insist upon. The care embedded in the creation of those balls reflects the people who made them. The Super Dragon Balls are different from all the rest in a way that resists comfortable categorization. They grant any wish without condition, limitation, or consequence, or at least without visible consequence. They are so large that a scouter capable of reading key levels cannot adequately describe them. Super Shenron, when summoned, manifests at a scale that makes the distances between planets seem reasonable. And he responds to the Serenian language, an ancient tongue that has passed out of common use and that even divine beings must search their memories to access. The Super Dragon Balls are not frequent. They appear at the largest moments of Super Story, the Zamasu Resolution, the Tournament of Power Wish, and their appearances register accordingly. The Kamehameha is more than a technique. In the context of the Dragon Ball timeline, it is a thread, a continuity of intention and energy that runs from Master Roshi to Goku to Goten and beyond. It is perhaps the most recognizable single element in the franchise, and its history within the timeline is worth following. Carefully, Master Roshi developed the Kamehameha over 50 years of practice, not training specifically for the technique, but arriving at it through the accumulated refinement of everything he understood about ki and movement and force. He never taught it with the intent that any student would master it quickly. It was, he believed, a technique that required the depth of experience that only decades could provide. He was wrong, in the particular way that the best teachers are sometimes wrong, by underestimating the student. Goku's immediate replication of the Kamehameha, imperfect but unmistakably correct in its essential form, was not the result of learning. It was the result of watching once and having a body that processes movement at a speed that bypasses ordinary understanding. This is one of the things that makes Goku's arc different from any other character in the franchise. He does not progress through effort alone. He progresses through effort and through something innate that has no precise name, only effects. The father-son Kamehameha during the Cell Games is the technique's most emotionally charged deployment. Goku, dead, extending his consciousness into the living world to join his energy with Gohan's, the two of them pressing against Cell's own Kamehameha, with everything they are the beam of physical argument about whether the world continues, is the moment the technique becomes something larger than a combat move. It becomes a statement. It says, this line, this energy, this family does not end here. Every major transformation in the Dragon Ball timeline carries a cost and a meaning, and they accumulate over the years of the story into a kind of personal archaeology, layers of what each character has been through, preserved in the forms their bodies have learned to take. The Great Ape transformation, the oldest Saiyan power, connected to the light of the full moon, amplifying a Saiyan's base power by a factor of 10, runs through the timeline from the very beginning. It is the form that killed Grandpa Gohan. It is the form that the Saiyans used to defeat the Tuffles. It is the form that Vegeta used against Goku on Earth, and that the Saiyan saga's most desperate moments turn around. By the time of Dragon Ball GT, it has been refined into Super Saiyan 4, still Great Ape at its root, but transformed and focused in a way that the original form was not. The Kaioken is different from the transformations that follow it, not a state but a technique, a multiplier applied to current power at the cost of the body's endurance. Every increment of Kaioken that Goku uses during the Saiyan and Frieza arcs is a calculated risk, a bet against what his body can sustain. The technique fades from the series as the transformations it leads toward make it somewhat redundant, until Dragon Ball Super, where Goku uses Kaioken stacked on top of Super Saiyan Blue in a combination whose audacity makes even trained fighters pause. Super Saiyan itself, as the years pass, becomes a baseline. What was once the legendary ultimate form becomes the form that Goten achieves as a child, that characters access without apparent difficulty. The legend does not diminish, but the series is making an argument about progress, about what one generation's ceiling becomes the next generation's floor. There is something quietly profound about watching the form that made Frieza fear his empire's destruction become the warm-up state for the fighters who follow Goku. Super Saiyan 2-3, the God forms, Blue Ultra Instinct, each one carries within it the logic of what came before and the question of what comes next. They are not simply power upgrades, they are the record of what each Saiyan has been through, what they were willing to become, what they had to lose or release to reach the next threshold. Vegeta's path to Ultra Ego, the destruction state, is the completion of an arc that began with his pride and ends with his understanding that true strength is found not in dominating others, but in absorbing what they offer and becoming something new from it. The Dragon Ball timeline, told from one angle, is a story about warriors and their transformations. Told from another angle, it is a story about the people who are not warriors, the people who exist in the spaces between the battles, who rebuild what the battles damage, who carry on the ordinary life that the fighters are theoretically protecting. Bulma is perhaps the clearest example. She is present at the beginning of the timeline's accessible history, 16 years old with a dragon radar and an agenda. She is present at its most recent chapters, 50 years old, still building technology that exceeds what anyone else on Earth can imagine, still occupying the particular role of brilliant, impatient, utterly indispensable. The Dragon Ball timeline does not happen without Bulma. She finds Goku. She builds the time machine that Trunks uses. She reverse engineers alien technology without instruction. She is not a warrior, and she has always been one of the most important people in the story. Chi-Chi's role is both simpler and more complicated. She chose to marry a warrior and then spent decades trying to create for her sons the life of scholarship and safety that her own upbringing had not included. Every time the world required Gohan to be something other than a student, Chi-Chi's carefully constructed alternative was dismantled again. She is, in a sense, the timeline's most consistently overruled character, and also one of its most consistent presences, because she never stopped trying. Dende became Earth's guardian and has held that role through the later Dragon Ball Super era with the quiet dedication of someone who understands exactly how important the work is and is not interested in credit. For doing it, he is connected to everything, to the Dragon Balls, to the Lookout, to the network of awareness that lets the Guardian feel what is happening to the planet they tend. He watches the same history that everyone else experiences, but he watches it from above. Mr. Satan, Hercule, is the most improbable hero in the Dragon Ball timeline, and also one of the most genuine. He is not powerful. He knows he is not powerful in the moments when honesty catches up with his self-presentation, and yet he has stood at the edge of battles beyond his comprehension and done what he could. He talked the people of Earth into contributing their energy to Goku's spirit bomb. He befriended the good Buu and gave him a home. He carried within him, beneath the showmanship and the exaggeration, the actual desire to protect people that the fighters around him so often take for granted. The timeline would be different without him. That is not a small thing. The Dragon Ball timeline does not end. That is perhaps its most remarkable quality when considered from a distance, in the quiet dark of late night. Most stories have endings, moments where the arc resolves into something final, where the characters find their rest and the world settles back into whatever ordinary means for them. Dragon Ball has those moments in abundance, but it also, always, has a next chapter, a next transformation, a next set of stakes that could not have been imagined from the previous chapter's vantage point. The universe that Zeno created in the beginning, the 12 universes that survived his disappointed culling, including Universe 7 with its pale blue planet and its improbable collection of warriors, is still there. It is still unfolding. The Dragon Balls that Kami created on Earth, expanded by Dende, are still there to be gathered, still holding within their orange surfaces the capacity for wishes that could change everything. The fighters who have reached forms that should not have been possible are still reaching, still training, still finding in the next opponent and the next transformation the same deep satisfaction that has driven the story from its very beginning? Goku, in the forest clearing where he began, would not have been able to imagine any of this. The boy with the 4-star Dragon Ball and the grandfather he loved and the tail he carried without self-consciousness? He was at the very beginning of a timeline so vast that even in its explored form it spans tens of thousands of years and encompasses the creation and near destruction of the universe itself. He walked into that story with his hands open and his curiosity intact and his capacity for growth apparently limitless. He has not, in all the decades since, closed his hands or exhausted his curiosity or found his limit. The timeline rests in the telling. All those years, all those battles, all those people restored and worlds rebuilt, and legends proven and legends exceeded, they settle, in the particular quiet of a story well told, into something that feels like peace. Not the absence of conflict, something deeper than that. The peace that comes from a story that has always believed in its characters, that has always trusted them to reach for the next thing, that has never asked them to stop growing. In the long arc of Dragon Ball's history, what remains most vivid is not the power levels or the transformations or the scope of the enemies defeated. What remains is the people, the specific irreducible people who filled these decades with their arguments and their loyalties and their losses and their recoveries. Vegeta crying at Namek, Gohan's roar at the Cell Games, Krillin's unearned calm in situations that would destroy lesser courage, Piccolo, who became the thing his origin made impossible through the slow, patient work of choosing differently every time choosing was available. The Dragon Ball timeline is very long, and it is very full, and it is still being written. Let that thought rest with you now, gently, as the night settles around everything and the story continues somewhere beyond the reach of waking. Thanks for spending this time in the Dragon Ball universe with me. If you'd like to keep drifting, another video is ready on the left of your screen. Maybe let it play as you close your eyes. Sleep might find you before the next story finishes.